All right, here we go.
In this
Hold on, let me start that over here. Hold on, back. There.
we were in this bomb crater, 2 or 3 other guys now. And during the, you're frightened, you're nearly frightened to death. And plus that the crabs, land crabs are running around in there with you, and the Japs were firing in our area. Like I say, you can hear mortar shells go over you. So that.
Well, you just heard from radio repairman Sergeant Bill Mauch, who was in Company A of the 8th Amphibious Tractor Battalion, the 1st Marine Division, the old breed, a Pacific warrior. We have so much more to unpack in this episode. Stick around.
All right. Good.
And now we go to, I'll just ask you, it's like, Ryan, you had a chance to interview Bill. Gosh, when was that? Was that last fall?
Well, hold on a second. Before we get going, I think we need to talk about our new gear. Look at this.
Oh, yeah.
See, so I don't know if this is going to make it to a video podcast, but we do have new gear in the Etsy store for anyone out there that may have looked a year ago or so. There was hardly anything. Well, now there's more than hardly anything. There's actually some more T-shirt colors available, more designs available, and this is one that I've actually ordered to make sure it wasn't all crooked and janky and all that kind of stuff. Wow. And it turned out good. We got the dog tag on the side here. We got the Warrior Next Door podcast here, and on the back we got a bigger version of the dog tags and everything. And we got hoodies. We got lots of different colors.
We got glasses. We got mugs. We got mouse pads. We got a whole bunch of stuff.
That's right.
Yeah,
yes.
I know that. And we've also corrected some of the olds for some people who may have, there you go. For some people who may have purchased some of our shirts early on, the setup, the design wasn't quite optimal. We've optimized that. I know that for mine, the logo on a T-shirt would cover my left nipple. It was too far down on my chesticle. So now it's been moved up to its proper place.
As we've talked about before, Tony, it's because you have virtually a level, like a hearth. It's like a hearth for a chest.
Like a cartoon chest.
Your pecs go straight out and come down. So pretty much anything you wear is going to be on the underside of your pecs. I mean,
oh my God,
we're going to have to move these up here on your shoulder. Way up here.
Yeah, I'll have like a halter top shirt. It'll just hang from my shelf chest, and my belly button will be hanging out. So,
halter tops coming up for the summer selection. We'll have those in the store.
Man, halter tops, malter tops. So
okay.
So at any rate, you just heard a clip from Bill Mauch there, a pretty compelling one about being in a foxhole and crabs and Japanese and all this stuff. I think what our audience will really enjoy is that this is from a Pacific War veteran that is not from our archives of people we interviewed back in the mid 2000s. You had a chance to meet Bill recently. How did that happen?
Well, our friend here in Tulsa, who you introduced me to, Tony, Mr. Eric Sims, he is very plugged into, and he has been for years, plugged into the local Tulsa World War II veteran population, and heavily involved with the volunteer groups and everything. And he reached out to us and he's like, "Hey, I've got a few guys that are still with us. You need to try to talk to these guys." So I called about 3 or 4 of these guys. A couple of them already had their interviews recorded for the Library of Congress. So, we didn't need to go down that road with them and everything. One guy was having a hard time remembering things. So, he probably wasn't going to be a good candidate for being able to tell his story and everything. But I called Mr. Bill Mauch, the subject of our series today, and he's 99 years old. He's going to be 100 years old in April of 2025, and he's in great shape. Very soft-spoken, real happy guy. Kind of guy you could sit and talk with for hours and everything. But yeah, he was in the U.S. Marine Corps. And he came over to Guadalcanal and Pavuvu in 1944, and just in time for the invasion of Peleliu, and then was attached to the 1st Marine Division, and basically tracked the same path through the Pacific that Eugene Sledge did in his book With the Old Breed,
Yep.
which was featured in the HBO miniseries The Pacific, one of 3 stories that were featured in that. So we've got as close as we're going to get, Tony, to a guy who went through the same places that Eugene Sledge did, on the same path, was all on the same spots that Mr. Sledge was. So we've got a real interesting story to tell.
And it's amplified by the fact that he fought in 2 Pacific Island campaigns, one being Peleliu and one Okinawa. None of them were easy. But Peleliu is one of those battles that it doesn't matter how many times I read some account about it, the horror of it continues to absolutely stun me. I never get calloused to the firsthand accounts that I've had a chance to read. We're about to listen to one here in a few minutes for our audience, which is great. But we're going to also add elements to it from other people who were there to reinforce some of the conditions that existed on this island. And Okinawa was another hell. But I'd argue that the Peleliu campaign was a self-inflicted wound by the United States. And we'll unpack that when he starts talking about it. But I've said this before. We've had a chance to feature, we feature has Harvey Hunt been the only Marine we featured so far?
Oh my gosh. As far as World War II Marine, I believe so.
Audience, we have more Marines in our archive.
Yeah.
Who have done some amazing stuff. Shame on us, because what I said during the Harvey Hunt podcast series, which was our second one we ever did as a newly minted podcast team with Ryan and I, was Harvey Hunt. And he was in a different regiment, had a different experience. But as I said there, I have an immense amount of respect for the Marine Corps. I love the Marine Corps ethos. They are like shock troop psychopaths. There's this podcast from
I don't think
Australia.
they would disagree with you, by the way.
No, they wouldn't. They'd see that as a freaking compliment. I mean, they are a bunch of 18, 19-year-old kids that when they show up in your beach, you've done something really bad and bad things are going to happen to you. So it's I'm really looking to unpack this. And I'll say one more thing before we get started with the clips or any other commentary you have, Ryan. This is another one that you were able to do in Sapulpa, Oklahoma, just this past fall. I have not heard any of these clips. I've not heard them. I cannot wait to listen to Bill tell me things that he told you not so long ago.
Yeah, we did this interview. I think it was just in around the 1st of August of 2024, and actually it was almost 80 years to the day that he shipped out for the Pacific. Whenever he embarked aboard the transport and took off from California and everything. So it's pretty interesting to be able to sit and talk with this guy who lived his life after this horrific time in the in our nation's history and in his personal history too. So so I guess what we can do is we'll go ahead and get started here. And as we always do, we've got I've got quite a few clips here, but I'll be playing a lot of them back to back and everything, so we don't have to stop for every individual clip here. Mm-hmm. But we'll start off with this pre-draft discussion here, where he just talks about what his life was like growing up in Oklahoma. If I can get this to work here. All right, we are here today with Mr. Bill Mauch. He is lives in Sapulpa, Oklahoma. It is August the 2nd, 2024. There you go. Mr. Mauch served in the U.S. Marine Corps during World War II, and he was in the Marine Corps from July 23rd of 1943 until February 22nd of 1946. He fought in the Pacific Theater and primarily was in the 8th Amtrak of the 1st Marine Division and fought on the islands of Peleliu and Okinawa. So I guess I'd just like to start and ask you the same question we ask all of our veterans.
Okay.
Where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor, and how'd that affect you?
I was at home. I think it was on a Sunday, the 7th of December, was it?
Yep.
And I was 17 years old, so to me, I didn't understand the severity of it all, it didn't really strike me too strongly.
Mm-hmm.
But since I was 17, I wasn't due to be drafted. But I was graduating from high school. Through the years, I had skipped a couple of grades and wound up a year ahead. So I was 17 years old when I graduated from high school.
Mm-hmm.
And when we graduated, most of the guys were 18, exactly 18. They immediately were gone into the service. I didn't volunteer. I was going to wait on the draft, which would be another year or so.
Mm-hmm.
And during that period of waiting, my brother-in-law and sister were living in Colorado, and they wanted me to come and stay with them while I waited my year before I was drafted. So for about 6 months, they helped me get a job with the railroad at La Junta, Colorado. I'm not sure what it is. Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, maybe. So I spent 6 months out there, and then I returned home and helped my dad in his laundry until I was drafted.
So, you know, Bill's waiting around to figure out what branch of service is his destiny. Where is he going to end up? Is he going to end up in the Army Air Corps, the Army, Navy? Who knows? And so, you know, a lot of these guys were content to just let that happen. You know, some wanted to go, they're like, yeah, heck with that. I know I want to be in this, that, or the other, and they just went out and they just signed up. But others decided that they were going to just, you know, let nature take its course, so to speak, and let the government decide where they needed to place him. And so that's what he was doing.
And we covered this in a previous episode. By 1944, 2/3 of the men in the military were drafted. They were not volunteers. So yeah, there was a huge influx of freshly minted volunteers after the attack on Pearl Harbor. That absolutely is true. But for the vast majority of people who fought in World War II, they were drafted. And if you think about it, there's nothing unpatriotic or cowardly about it. The fact is, these guys came out of the Great Depression, and these jobs, the work that they had available. He's talked about going to La Junta, Colorado. I've been down there. I shot seismic data around that area, actually, so I know that area really well. But he went to La Junta, Colorado to work for the railroad right out of high school. That was something they probably could not have done 2 or 3 years earlier because those jobs weren't there. A lot of these guys were finally working, finally making money. And I think their thought was exactly what you said, Ryan. I'm going to ride this thing out and see what happens. And if they draft me, I'll do whatever they ask me to do. And that sounds like what Bill did.
You know what's interesting? We just mentioned the only other Marine we've featured so far yet in our podcast was Harvey Hunt. Yeah. And what was Harvey doing before the war?
Railroad.
And he broke both of his legs, so he was told.
Yes. Over and over again.
He was told that he had broken legs. Anyway, you've got to listen to that series because Harvey tells it way better than we do. But it's such a great series or anything. But anyway, it's interesting that both of these guys, both these Marine guys we're featuring here, both of them worked for the railroad before the war. Kind of interesting. I don't know.
Both of them out of Oklahoma, both of them working for the railroad. Both of them biding their time until they had to go do something.
Yep. So one of the great things that a lot of these veterans do when they have been out of the military for a while, and especially as they get on in years, is they go back and they write out their history, essentially what happened to them, kind of like an itinerary, you know, a bullet point of where they were when, when they actually enlisted, where they enlisted, when they got out, and every milestone event of their military career. So what we're going to be doing during this series is we're going to be going back and referring to Bill's own itinerary so we can keep things in order as far as when things actually happened to him here. So, first point he makes here, he talks about, waiting to actually get involved in the military. We'll play the next clip and then we'll refer to the first 2 bullet points and we'll talk a bit more about that.
Okay.
And then my choice would have been Air Force, and I assume there's a major part of the young men wanted in the Air Force.
Yeah.
But by the time my time rolled around to be drafted, they didn't need more Air Force people. So I volunteered for the Marine Corps, and my neighbor, Bob Criswell, he was within a week or 2 of the same age. We went in together with Earl Crawford. So there was 3 of us from Sapulpa that went in together. And we rode a slow train to San Diego. It took about 3 days, and the trains then weren't air conditioned. The windows were wide open so to get what little breeze you could. And the route they took was down through El Paso and then straight west along the Mexican border. And the trains were just filled with young mothers and children. So it was difficult to even have a seat in which you could claim and occupy for a while.
You know, it's interesting. That's exactly what Harvey said. You know, he took the same route whenever he enlisted, got involved in the Marine Corps, and he talked about having to stand nearly the entire way out to the West Coast. And, you know, so he talks about being in the U.S. Marine Corps. He enlisted as a private on July the 23rd, 1943 in Oklahoma City. And right after that, he spent 2 weeks at home. Then on from August 7th to August 9th of 1943, his train ride to the U.S. Marine Corps took place to the recruit depot, San Diego, California, in 1943. So sounds like those trains were just jam-packed full because he had to do the same thing. He'll talk here in a second about what he had to do for sleeping. So, yeah, go ahead, Tony.
Well, 2 things. One, we also interviewed Dorothy Gibbons, who's a New Jerseyite who ended up working in Oklahoma for the U.S. military for basically out of Clinton, Oklahoma, helping develop drones that obviously are more fully formed today than they were back in 1944. She talks about that during 43 and 44 and 45. The transportation network, United States, which was more train focused back then than highway, that would happen in the 50s, was overtaxed the entire time. It absolutely was. The second thing I want to add is if this guy was from Michigan, he would have had plenty of places to sit because he would have just made the wives and kids stand up the whole time. So
this guy's just a polite Oklahoma boy.
I'm telling you, I'm from Michigan. There is such a thing as this Southern chivalry, Southern hospitality. I'm not sure most Michiganians would have let some pregnant woman sit down. He was, hey, I was here first. I was here first.
You know, so I got to say, this is interesting that you bring this up because remember when you and I lived in Houston, we were working for ConocoPhillips, and we went to at that time, the 60th anniversary reenactment of the Battle of Iwo Jima up around Fredericksburg?
I do.
You know what I'm going to say? Okay, so we went to, it was this big, awesome, reenactment of the Battle of Iwo Jima on this ranch out in the country, probably 30 miles outside of Fredericksburg. They had a hill there that kind of looked like, a little bit like Mount Suribachi, but they had all these reenactors there. They had, artillery firing blanks and tanks and Japanese guys up on the hill, like Japanese reenactors.
They had a bonsai charge.
They had all this it was amazing to watch this. So Tony and I, we get there, we're like, well, we want to be right up against the fence watching this. We're going to get right up against the fence. So we walk in and we walk down past the crowd, way down where there's nobody. So we could stand right up against the fence like kids, press our noses against the fence and not bother anybody. So what happens? We're doing that. And all around us starts filling in a crowd around us. And all these elderly people coming up and setting their lawn chairs up And we're standing there like, well, what the heck? These guys see that we're standing here.
Right.
So then what happens, Tony?
I don't remember. What did
Okay,
I
you don't
do?
remember this. Okay, cool.
No.
So I can make this story up as however I want
Yeah,
at this point.
I remember that. I remember us saying, we've got a spot. And then all these people started horning in.
Yes. So all these people started horning in, and there's a bunch of people behind us. And we're like, well, we're not going to move. We were here first. Well, then what happens? This older gentleman gets up from where his wife and whoever was sitting with him, and he walks up to us and goes, "Do you guys mind sitting down? We're sitting behind you here, and we can't see because you're in our way." And Tony turned around and was like, "Are you serious?" And we start Tony and this guy start having a little bit of jawing at each other. And Tony's like, well, you guys came and sat behind us. What do you expect? We were here first. We were here to watch. We don't have chairs like you do. Anyway,
I wasn't wrong.
no, I have
that.
thought about this long and hard because we were there first. But
Right.
so what ended up happening, you were like kind of like starting to bow up a little bit with this guy. This guy's probably 70 or so.
I could take him.
But yeah, you could totally. And so I was like, Tony, look, this is a slippery slope. If we start getting into an altercation here with this guy, we're going to get kicked out, and we came all this way.
Yeah.
Because what's it going to look like? Tony, this bald-headed dude, picking on this older dude. Who's going to get the sympathy there, right?
Won't be me. That's for damn sure.
even though we knew we were in the right.
Right.
So
I remember being horned in a guy. I forgot about bowing up on the guy. It does not surprise me. That is a Michigan thing. I know we got people in Michigan listening right now. You all know how you drive on the highways, and courtesy is not in the forefront of your minds.
And any of Tony's friends listening know that I'm telling the exact truth because they've probably seen Tony do this a million times.
Oh,
So-
they totally have. They absolutely know. So,
No,
so at
but-
any rate, he
we just-
needlessly stood the whole time. He could have had a seat. All he just had to.
Oh,
he's
we
bigger
walked
than a
away.
pregnant
We were
woman.
both hot under the collar. I'm like, it was a no-win situation because,
Yeah.
we're a couple of younger guys. There's an older crowd of people sitting there. They're in their lawn chairs. But, shame on them. We were there first. Shame on them for coming up and deliberately sitting behind us.
Yeah.
Like, why? Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Screw them.
Yeah. I'm still a little bitter about that. But
I do
anyway,
remember it. I
you
do it
don't-
so frequently that I can't remember all the times. Then it's like, hey, man, you might see. Get the hell out of there.
Okay, well, see, now you know why I brought that up, because Tony's probably very correct. He would not have given up his seat to a pregnant lady. So
No, I mean, like, I was here first.
he was there first, right? Yeah. So, all right, let's move on here. A little bit of digression there, but just a little insight into our psyche, So, all right, so now we're going to talk a little bit with Bill about, what the conditions were like, whenever he had to go sleep on this train that was packed full of people.
The cars have this little landing on each end, or at least one end, and they had a big trash box which was 4 by 4 by 4 whatever feet, and I actually spent one night sleeping on it.
Oh my gosh! Outside in the train, outside
Yeah.
the train car.
Outside of the enclosed area, but there's no advantage to the enclosed area because you still had to have the windows open and the smoke peeling in.
Oh my gosh!
So we spent 3 days getting to San Diego. And Earl Crawford was carrying the papers. If there was 2 or 3 guys traveling together, someone would be assigned the job to carry the papers, or registration papers, or enlistment papers, I guess. And it took about 3 days to get to San Diego. And they tell you when you arrive there, you need 10 cents at least. You don't be broke completely because you got to pay for your bus ride from San Diego out to the Marine boot camp.
I didn't know that.
So that was that period of my life.
They made you pay for your own
Yeah.
transportation from the train depot to the boot camp.
Well, we had a little bit of extra money. I think they gave us a little traveling money, but
Okay.
they reminded you to be sure and you had didn't have
Don't
10
spend it
cents
all.
left. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's their first lesson in being frugal.
Yeah. So and that's what amazes me here. Okay, They just like, all right, dude, here's $5.
Right.
You know, back then things were cheap. Here's $5 to get you from, wherever you got on the train to the depot, but make sure you keep 10 cents out so you can pay for the bus ride. Well, what happens if, I'm sorry, I spent all my money?
So Ryan, that's exactly why they had to tell that person that. So many people took every penny of whatever the Marine Corps gave them to get them out there, which was probably way more than enough money, and then showed up absolutely broke
I'm
on
sure.
playing craps and buying beer and doing God knows what, because that's what Marines do, that they had to have a policy saying, here's $5. For the love of God, at least keep 10 cents of this.
Well, or hey, here's an idea. Why don't you just get a damn bus or a 6x6 and pick up the dudes? They're going to be riding those 6x6s the rest of their Army or Marine Corps career anyway.
Totally.
Throw them in the back and get them used to it and just drive them there. That way you have to worry about these idiots that spend all their money.
Which I would have been one of them.
Which I mean, I would have too. I would have spent it on who knows what.
There's
Matchbox
all
cars
kinds
or-
of things to spend money on, especially these guys out of the Great Depression, and now they're traveling across the country and they've got whatever they have. You could bet your ass that there was some people borrowing a dime when they got there.
So looking at his Marine Corps record here, he arrived the recruit training boot camp depot, spent 9 weeks at the recruit depot, 8th Recruit Battalion, San Diego, August 9th of 1943 to October 15th of 1943. He was in platoon number 631. His platoon sergeant, I can't believe he's got all this information here, G.W. Lenfer, corporal, and then B. Belsky, PFC J.H. Berryman.
Wow.
So I don't know if those were all the guys that were fashioning him into a Marine at that point. It sounds like it.
I would imagine so.
And he made PFC, Private First Class, rank on September the 28th of 1943. So while he was in boot camp, he got his first stripe. So let's talk to him. Let's see what he says about his thoughts when he arrived here.
At my age, I didn't really give it much thought.
Yeah.
Since I had all I needed in the Air Force, so then it was my choice. Back then, Navy or Marine Corps. And the neighbor boy, Bob Criswell, and I, we were kind of gung-ho about the Marine Corps, if not the Air Force.
Yeah. So when you arrived at the training, at your basic training, this would have been Camp Pendleton?
No, this was in San Diego Marine Training Depot. It was actually just outside of the city of San Diego.
Okay.
There's a body of water in there, I forget what they call it, but there was a naval training base and a Marine training base right there at San Diego.
Did you have to put your feet on the yellow footprints? A lot of
I wasn't familiar with those.
a lot of Marines I've interviewed that were Vietnam veteran era Marines described getting off the bus, and they were being told, stand on the yellow footprints. You had to put your feet on the yellow. Okay, so they didn't have that yet. Whenever you,
I don't know what my indoctrination was.
Okay.
I don't remember. It wasn't that for sure.
Okay. So it's amazing. It sounds like these guys were revered so much that they painted the footprints and used them for the training after that. I mean, that's how I would interpret that. So.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do a little Google foo while we're doing this to see when those yellow footprints were there. I also know that prior to World War II and during it, there's a lot of changes to where people were being trained. Paris Island on the East Coast was kind of Marine Corps Central, and at some point they opened up the training center in San Diego. I don't have those dates like right in front of me, but they may not have been there because the San Diego training facility may be newer, and I'll go ahead and kind of check that out while we're
and that's the thing I always forget, and that is that there's the MCRD, Marine Corps Recruit Depot, and that's where they go first. Then they go to Camp Pendleton for training. And I don't know if that's where they do the advanced training. Some of you guys out there listening that are Marine Corps guys will probably be able to tell us. But yeah, I remember a lot of the Vietnam guys I've interviewed that were Marine Corps guys. They talked about that, going to the MCRD, and then you go from there to Camp Pendleton eventually and everything. So
Yeah, and there's a lot on the yellow footprints and all that. I instead of looking this up, if any of our audience can share on our website, the Warrior Next Door Facebook page, more about the yellow footprints when they were actually made available, that would be
the
great.
history of the yellow
The
footprints.
history, but so I've seen them. Ryan, did you ever see them? Did you
No,
ever out in
I've
San
never
Diego?
been out there, never been there to it.
So I got a picture of them. They're there. They're real. They're amazing. People, the civilians like myself, would not even walk on them. No one told us that we could or couldn't. We just felt like we shouldn't and didn't.
Well,
And
you
as
knew
we
that
said,
they would have chewed your ass out if you stepped on
oh,
them.
dude, like we had someone
I'd
else
pay
on.
money to that to see your ass chewed out, Tony.
Oh
So,
man, you remember the other Ryan that we interviewed recently from the Iraq
yeah,
War? You
Ryan
can't even.
Downing.
Yeah, right. You can't even walk on the grass there. They'll tell you that.
That's right.
People did get yelled at for that, and I have a feeling they get yelled at for the yellow footprints as well. But
Yeah.
they may not have been there in 1943.
But yeah, fair enough. Well, all right, we'll keep going. Where he's talking about, we're going to get into his training, and then we'll keep going and listen to where he talks about his radio training. So, what was training like? How big of a shock was that for you, physically, mentally?
It was very difficult, naturally. I was surprised. I was very small, probably I'd say 135 or 40 pounds.
What was your height?
I thought 5'11" for years, but I'm not sure because I at least have strength.
Yeah.
3 inches.
We all have when we get older.
But anyway, it was difficult, but I was in decent shape, and I was surprised. Like I said, I actually gained weight and body mass, I guess. And the food wasn't all that great, but somehow the regimen you went through with the exercise and the food that you did get, evidently worked well to strengthen you and put weight on you.
What would become your main role in the U.S. Marine Corps?
I was a radio operator and repairman, and they trained me for both of those. In boot camp they had a little test they give you, aptitude I'll call it, what you might be good at, that they needed different assignments. And the code part, you had to listen and match and say, did this match the other, and the 3 dots, or whatever. So evidently from that part, that's how they selected the ones that went to radio operator school. And right immediately after boot camp, I went into the operator school, and it was there in San Diego on the base. So I was happy that I went there because the 2 other fellows I went in service went to Midway from there, and Midway was some of the early fighting with the Japanese. But it was I don't know how many weeks. I was thankful that the Marine Corps trained me. Actually, I was in training for a full year, unless I had a couple of furloughs. But I went through boot camp, which was shortened to 9 weeks from 13 or whatever, because they wanted to get you through and get you out of there and ship you overseas. And then I went to, from there I went immediately into radio operator, and you learned voice communication, you learned code
Mhm.
with the key, which was worthless at that time, but you still learn that. And after that, the year was near the end. I think near around Christmas time, I was on furlough for quite a lengthy time. Then I went back and they shipped me to Omaha, Nebraska for a radio repair school. And every place I went, I was a 3-day train ride. Trains were awful slow and were constantly picking up people. So I rode for 3 days going to Omaha, and I went to the repair school there. And it was about a 3-month course. It was in the dead of winter at Omaha, and the streets were icy. And Omaha has 2 main drags through it, going east and west, and I've forgotten the name of those, but they were 2-lane each way. So we'd fall out of where we lived in. They housed us in a YMCA building, which was a really good deal.
Mhm.
So they fed us there, and we housed us there, and they even had a swimming pool, I think on the 3rd floor, which surprised me, but somewhere in there.
Well, that's good because a lot of the guys that joined the Marines couldn't swim, which is another thing. Seriously, the Marine Corps and the Navy back in World War II, there's this idea of sending your kids to swim lessons wasn't a thing in the Great Depression. So it's funny that they had a swimming pool. Probably only half of them could use it. But a couple of things I took out of these 2 clips, Ryan, is thing number one, he talked about getting bigger in the Marine Corps training. I know that
Yeah.
Stephen Ambrose in his book Citizen Soldier talks about these kids from the Great Depression being malnourished, stunted oftentimes, and then they would come into boot camp where they had the most food they've ever had before. Not the most physical activity. Men worked hard back then, but they had
Sure.
the chance to eat and train. And he has the average, like statisticians measured that when what their weight was in their chest and all that stuff when they came in and what they were when they got out, and it was significant. So that was thing number one that he talked about. Plus, he is 5'11". That was pretty tall for a dude.
That is pretty tall. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, for 1943. I mean, most of the guys would have been like 5'8", 5'7".
Mhm.
And then the second thing is how much training it takes to be a specialist in the military. And in this case, on radios. I mean, that was quite a freaking odyssey that he was on.
Yeah, and we still have more, another clip after this about his radio repair training and what he actually had to do during that training. But, just like a lot of the training for the guys in the Air Corps, and I mean, when you were going to become a specialist and they put him through this aptitude test and determined that this was the appropriate path for him. So obviously he had the aptitude to be able to do this sort of technical job of being responsible for the radios, the communication behind the radios, the code, and the repair of the radios also. So it's no wonder when we start getting into the Battle of Peleliu, he talks about how he was held back in reserve. He was kind of a valuable, and not that the rest of the guys weren't valuable, but his training made him more rare than the rest of the guys. And so they had to keep him around, make sure that they had him there for the radio parts, which was becoming very important.
Look, life is like that, right? On a football field, the quarterback is the person everyone tries to protect. It doesn't mean he's a better human being than the offensive line
No,
doing
absolutely right.
But some people have certain aptitudes for certain things or certain training, and you need to make sure those people can do those. And these radios were so important. There was a quote that I read last year that said one of the reasons that the American infantry was so effective is because every lieutenant had a radio. And that was not the case in most other militaries in World War II. The radios weren't pushed down to the platoon level. They were up at, battalion. And in fact, I think in our third podcast with Eldon Ross, we unpack the FM radio, how the U.S. military read an article or did a ride along with some state police who were testing these FM band radios as opposed to AM for police work, and they found them so much more valuable, so much more clear, the range so much better that they very quickly adopted all of those for the U.S. military back in the 30s in the interwar period. So these radios, the United States had highly effective, modern, quality radios with men like Bill trained to use them to great effect, and be able to have a handset on the front line from a lieutenant saying, I'm in sector 382. I need artillery fire right now, X number coordinates, and be able to get that within 5 or 10 minutes. It's almost magical.
Yeah, and to be able to relay that back to the Navy ships offshore and be able to call in artillery on a position like they were able to do, the concentration of fire, the time on target sort of stuff that they were doing. So I've got some information on the radio that he was training on, which is the SCR 300. It's one of those portable backpack radios. It was used by the Signal Corps during the war, backpack mounted, and it was the first radio to be nicknamed the walkie-talkie.
All right, cool.
Because you could walk around with it and you could talk with it, okay? So the history behind it, Motorola actually developed it. They were given the contract by the War Department to develop a portable battery-powered voice transmitter and receiver for field use by infantry units. It was rather large, weighing up to 38 pounds, depending on the whether I had a battery with it or not, which you need, obviously. There was a handheld model, and then there was the backpack model, and the SCR 300 was primarily intended as a walkie-talkie for foot combat troops. So that's where the term came from. It was finally accepted after some tests took place at Fort Knox, Kentucky in spring of 42. And the performance of the SCR 300 during those tests demonstrated its capacity to communicate through interference and the rugged quality of the terrain. So the FM aspect of it is exactly what you're talking about. It cut through a lot of the static and the horrible distance that you'd get out of the AM radios and everything. They were able to produce nearly 50,000 of these radios during the course of World War II. They saw action, of course, in the Pacific Theater, beginning in New Georgia, which is not far from Guadalcanal, in August of 43, and every island campaign through Okinawa. That's what Bill Mauch was doing. He was in charge of the radio, and he was in charge of keeping it going. Saw heavy use in the Normandy invasion, of course, the Italian campaign, and it says that it was key equipment that helped deter confusion in the Battle of the Bulge. So this was a very important piece of technology that, obviously was a game changer for us. The range that it had was about 3 miles, which is significant. There was different frequencies that you could set to. They were all different, and he talks about this in a second. It's all different quartz crystals that you use that are shaved down to certain thicknesses that are different frequencies, and he'd have to go in, change out the quartz crystals to change to different frequencies. So he had this set of crystals with him all the time, so he would go through and he'd change these out. Kind of wild to think about it. Now you just kind of turn a dial, and stuff. But the 3 mile range varied with the terrain. Obviously, if you're down in a canyon, we all know what that's like when you have a radio. It's just hard to hear stuff. And of course, depended on where the transmitter and the receiver, and you had an antenna on the back of your pack also. So a lot of times that antenna was just kind of like a flag to the Japanese or the enemy, like take that guy out right there. So there was some risk involved.
And I think the only thing the Japanese liked to shoot more than radio men during the war were medics. So you got those two people who were and then followed by officers. So no, I'm looking forward to hearing his take on this, because we did a little series on the FM radio, but not on the actual radio pack and its capabilities. Yeah.
All right. So here we go. Some more on his repair training. So when you were doing your radio repair school there, it was radio operations and repair. Is that correct?
Yes, well, my first course was operations, and then the repair school followed.
Was this just general radios of all kinds, or was there any specific radio you were being trained on?
No, it was just general of all kinds.
Okay.
In fact, we each had to build a super heterodyne, I'll call it, AM radio.
You had to build one.
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah. Well, they gave us parts,
Uh-huh.
the coils and the vacuum vacuum tubes, which we used in those days.
Yeah.
So we actually each built a radio.
Did you have any experience doing that, or they taught you how to do it?
They taught me how.
Ah, okay.
I had no experience prior to that. Well, I had around home. I'd fiddle with soldering a little bit.
So when they gave you your aptitude test, which obviously set you on this path, did you know you had this sort of aptitude? Did you do anything when you were younger that you could like, okay, I can see why they put me in that role because I liked electronics, or did you not know that you had this?
No, I had no idea
Really?
where I would go.
Do you feel like it was a
the
good?
aptitude test told them that we'll try him here.
Did you feel like that the aptitude test did a good job?
Yeah, it worked out. I think the Marine Corps did a good job. In my case, not all for sure.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, I was either in training for a full year, either on furlough or in training, some sort of training for that first year I was in the Marine Corps.
Okay.
And that was an advantage to me later on for, if you have mess duty or guard duty or whatever, you helpfully
Yeah.
didn't have to take too much part in all that, which to my advantage.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he was a specialist, you
Yeah.
know, and so he had to keep training. He had to keep learning. He had other stuff to do. So that got him out of some of the, dirtier jobs, so to speak,
Yeah, I love to take out the trash, but I gotta go change a vacuum tube, guys. I'm sorry.
I wish I could clean that bathroom with the toothbrush, but I'm sorry, I got to read some manuals,
Now, if you guys want to go in there and fix that radio before the captain gets back, then I'll take out the trash. Oh, no, okay. Well, I'll see you later then.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
The value of an education.
The value of an education. That's right, That's right, kids. Listen to that.
right.
Value of an education. So, all right. So his repair training was 14 weeks long.
Oh,
January 27th of 1944 till May the 6th, almost the entire first half of the year. So he said it was class number MTD 9 and 9A. I'm not sure what that is. Marine Training Detachment Radio Materials School, 2205, okay, Omaha, Nebraska. He even has his room number. He was on the third deck of the YMCA building in Omaha. Wow. Lots of detail.
Audience, hold on. He wrote third deck in a building. That is so Marine Corps, right? Because that's what the Navy and the Marines call floors. They call them all decks.
Interesting. Wow. So then from there, he had a train ride. Let's see, I'm on number 8. Yeah, 8 and 9. Train ride to the 2nd School Field Signal Battalion, and he went back to Camp Pendleton. He was a Field Signal Battalion trainee in the training center there, from May 6th to May 9th of 1944. And then he went on to do communication training May 10th to July 14th of 44 in Camp Pendleton. So let me see here. Let's go ahead and move on to the next segment here. This is where he's going to find out his assignment to what group he's going to be attached to. So you said it was about 3 months for your radio training
in Omaha, and then my 3-day train ride back to San Diego, and then I went to more training. It was a signal battalion in Pendleton, and after a month or two there, they assigned me to the 8th Amphibious Tractor, which had been formed just a few months before that. So I was assigned to the 8th Amtrak group.
The 8th Amtrak Group. Okay.
Yeah, battalion, and that's around 650 people or so.
Okay.
And composed of 4 companies, headquarters, and A, B, and C. And each of those had around slightly over 150 people in each company.
Yeah, so that was May the 1st of 1944 that he was assigned to the 8th Amtrak. So, just for our listeners, if you're unaware, I mean, everybody's heard of the Higgins boats, right? In the European theater of operations, they were used to great effect on D-Day. And these were these boats that were operated by the U.S. Coast Guard. They had the coxswain in the back that was driving the boat and everything. And they were, basically a long barge, and the front door of the Higgins boat would drop once they hit the beach. And they were actually a boat. They would pull up, they'd kind of beach it onto the beach. They would drop the ramp, the guys would run out the front. That would lighten the load. The ship would be able to pull off then, put the ramp up, they'd go back out and get more. Okay, so the amphibious tractors, however, were essentially like tanks, floating tanks. You recall the duplex drive tanks that were used in Normandy that not that great of effect. They were a lot of them swamped.
Basically a Sherman tank with a propeller on the back.
That's right, with a curtain that rose up that would displace enough water that it would float the 40-ton tank or whatever it was underneath it.
In theory,
what a hair-raising adventure that must have been for these guys. It'd be frightening stuff. Anyway, so the Amtrak though is more like a proper attack vehicle. Yeah. These guys are coming in. They have tank treads and they have cups in them that allow it to basically push water as they're going through. And they float. They hold about 25 men. They had a crew of 3, and they used a 7-cylinder radial engine in these things. So imagine how loud this would have been going across the surf with all the ships firing, the battleships and the destroyers firing on the beaches and stuff. We'll get to all that here pretty quickly and stuff, but these amphibious tractors were just that. They were essentially tanks that hauled men that had much better armor and protection than the Higgins boats did. And once you hit the beach, you didn't just stop there like the Higgins boat would. They'd crawl right up out of the surf and they'd keep going inland, and they'd drop the guys off somewhere, maybe a mile or 2 inland if they needed to. Yeah. And they would drop the guys off out of the back of the amphibious tractor rather than the front, right in full view, of the enemy. If they're coming off the front, they're coming out the back. They can at least hide behind the tank, the amphibious tractor, for a bit before they go running off into the jungle. So
yeah, Higgins was famous for saying the Navy didn't know a damn thing about building boats, so he built them. I would say that Higgins didn't know a damn thing about amphibious assault by putting that door on the front. I think anyone who watched Band of Brothers has seen that infamous clip of the whole Higgins boats of men getting mowed down when that front
or Saving Private
launched.
Ryan. It was Saving
Private Ryan or The Longest Day. So to me, I think they made the Amtrak made a hell of a lot more sense. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So now he's going to talk a bit more about the amphibious tractor, and then we'll get into the specific model of amphibious tractor that he was able to basically ride in. So at that point, you knew you would be aboard an Amtrak during the invasions. Is that when you realized that?
Yes.
Okay.
We actually made practice landings, and they explained to us how to handle that part of it.
So what was that training like once you were assigned to that group? What was the training like, and how did that go?
It didn't last too long. I assume probably 3 or 4 weeks from what my schedule shows there. And it was sometimes in very, very rough water. And Amtraks aren't known to keep you very dry. You're subject to bad weather.
Now those are the ones, they don't open in the front like they did at Normandy. These had tank tracks so they could come up out of the water and keep going inland, right?
That's true.
Okay. Let me keep going here, and we'll go move on to the actual model, the LVT-4.
Anyway, the one we were in was the LVT-4,
Okay.
landing vehicle tracked. And the tracks allowed you to travel on land and water. And your maximum speed on land was about 23 miles an hour. Your maximum speed in water was very slow, 7 or 8 miles an hour.
Okay.
And
How many people manned? What was the crew of an Amtrak?
well, the Amtrak had three-man crew.
Okay.
You had the tractor driver, and you had my job, which was a radio operator. And then usually, in our case, the A company commander rode back in the open cargo area, but he had a position there. And the communication system consisted of 3 intercom systems. Your microphone and your earphones, and what else? Okay, each company then had 2 radio repairmen.
Okay.
So each repairman, each one of these were responsible for about 12 tractors. So you have the intercom system and the radio, which was a big SCR radio, signal corps radio. And it was crystal operated. I don't know whether you have ever heard of radios that operated with crystals.
Is that a quartz?
Quartz, yeah.
Yep.
They would grind them a certain thickness to get a certain frequency.
Okay.
That way, in case the enemy intercepted and knew your frequency you were operating on, you could change, and you actually had a choice of about 100 crystals.
Oh, really?
I don't know
So you
why.
physically would have to change the crystals out to switch
Yeah,
frequencies.
and the company would give you that information, tell you to go ahead and what to change to,
Okay.
so that the enemy is out of luck after that for a while.
Wow. So, yeah, so a bit more about, what exactly it was that his job, he was actually, like he said, in charge, with him riding in there were only 2 repairmen per company. He was in company A. So he was one of the repairmen, obviously. And each one of these guys was responsible for 12 Amtraks. So, the company A commander rode in the Amtrak with him, it sounds like. So then he would relay, or they would relay, commands, observations from the commander to the other 11 boats that were coming in, so they could all coordinate, maybe together, arrive together, talk this through as they're approaching the beach. Letting everybody know, hey, I see a Japanese gun over there on that emplacement there. Heads up, there's a nest up here. So think about that. Wouldn't that have been great to have had for the guys in Normandy, just a few months before this, to be able to coordinate like that as they came in their waves and talk about the hot pockets that they were about to approach.
Amen. And to be able to use those radios in those LVTs, landing vehicle tracked, which is what we're talking about here, to be able to coordinate with the destroyers or the other ships offshore at Normandy. I mean, after the war, no one used the Higgins boats, but an Amtrak, which is another word for these LVTs, is still being some form of that is still being used to this day. So they were way more beneficial. Something that's interesting, we talked about the FM radios being discovered from an article or some sort of news piece on the state police using them. Did you hear where the Marine Corps connected with Roebling to help develop the Amtrak?
No.
It came out of an article that there were these Marines that were in charge of coming up with new types of vehicles to go across different types of terrain. They read an article in Life magazine where this guy Roebling had this thing called an alligator to go through swamps and muddy terrain. They meet up with this guy, and that was the genesis of the Amtrak, was to militarize this alligator that they read about in Life magazine during the pre-war period.
No, I had no idea that that was the history behind that.
Yeah, I
That's
didn't either.
crazy.
It is. I mean, and it's really it. I tip my hat to the military. A lot of militaries can be very territorial. If we didn't come up with the idea, then it's a stupid idea. The U.S. military, I'm sure other militaries around the world do this as well, but the U.S. military has historically and traditionally still does borrow ideas from the civilian sector. A more recent example is during the Persian Gulf Wars. On these M16s we always use these aluminum magazines that if you dropped them, they would dent or bend and then they wouldn't work and they jam. So a bunch of soldiers were found using these plastic PMag Magpul magazines that were being used by civilians. They were hard plastic. They didn't dent. They were you could drive a truck over them. And the military looked at them. It's like, wow, these are better than what we have. And now that is standard issue across the military. So
Really?
it's really interesting that Life magazine did this. And the other thing that I did not know is there's a landing vehicle tracked. And that's the thing that they bring in, like you said, 24, 25 troops in. And then they had landing vehicle tracked tank. And that's the thing that had a 3, 4, 5, 6-man crew. And they were the ones that had bigger guns on them, 75 millimeter howitzers, 37 millimeter cannons. All of them had machine guns, but I didn't realize there's two different styles. One style was to be out ahead of the assault wave, to help coordinate the assault, as you said, to look for hard points, to go up on the beach and blow them the hell up,
Yeah.
so that the men behind them could come off these landing vehicle tracks, these Amtraks, and then move inland. I did not know that there were two different types, that one was a tank that was more heavily armed, and the other one was primarily a people mover.
What was amazing is, and I cut out, there was a part in there that I cut out where, he actually shows me the picture of the LVT-4 in a book that he has called Across the Reef. And I took it out because it doesn't translate well to audio podcasts. There would have been a lot of dead air there and stuff like that.
Right.
But these things were tall too. They were roughly 12 feet tall. I mean, and they had, from the front, they had a very high pitched bottom to them. So, and they were, slightly, they had some armor to it. So the bullets would deflect and go down underneath it. There was no flat hard point on it where you could actually get penetration easily. They had slits in the front, like you'd see like in a tank, where the driver was in one and he was looking out, like that. And the other driver was next to him and stuff, The engine was, like I said, a 7-cylinder radial engine that was made by Continental, and it was housed in the center of gravity. And so there's a hump between the driver and the assistant driver, and that hump in between them, covered up, is the engine. And I can't imagine the noise being in that front compartment like that, driving that thing. Anyway, it's crazy.
I couldn't either. And that engine came out of the Stuart Light tank. And a lot of times the turrets, they pulled those out of the Stuart Light tanks as well. Something else that I saw that was interesting is one of the reasons why the Japanese felt like the Americans would have a hard time invading Peleliu and wouldn't do it is there was this 10-foot or 15-foot embankment, this coral embankment on the beach that you had to traverse. And they knew that our existing LVTs from Tarawa couldn't do it. The Seabees, the construction battalions, made, I think, 20 to 50 of these special versions of an Amtrak that had this bridge on top. So when they landed, they could slide this bridge off and create like a series of ramps along the beach where men and other LVTs could go up this embankment and not get stuck. The Seabees did that.
Wow, no kidding.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either. It's in the wiki page for the LVT towards the bottom. I saw this thing with this big wooden, it looks like a bridge on top of it. And I'm like, what the hell would they use that for? And I read it's like, holy crap, they made that specifically for Peleliu.
Well, and here's the thing that's brilliant about the amphibious tractor. You think of the Higgins boat, right? How many times have you read the stories or heard the accounts of the guys? They're like, "Oh, we were coming into Omaha and we beached on a sandbar. The ramp goes down." Well, it turns out that was just some offshore bar. They
Yes.
still had to go through 100 yards of surf to get
Yep.
out of the ocean, and there were deep runnels of deep water in between. So these guys would step off, immediately go underwater trying to make it towards the beach, and they drowned. Okay. Well, with these, you can just keep going.
Yep.
Come up on the runnel, you
Drive
keep
over it.
going. You drive over it, you float, you go to the next part, you come up out of the water, you go inland, you get off that damn beach. And that's the thing that's great about the amphibious tractor.
And they made thousands of them. The LVT4 that he's talking about, they made almost 9,000 of them. The LVT2, they made almost 3,000. That was the one that was used the most because it was earlier in the war. And then they had these tank varieties, overall, 12, 13, 14,000 of these things were made. So, and they were used by the Army in the Pacific and the Navy in the Pacific. Let's not forget the Army played a huge role in Peleliu as well, which is coming up pretty soon, and also in the Philippines. Kudos to the United States military for recognizing that there's a better way to get men ashore, a safer way to get men ashore. And like I said, to this day, the United States Marines has amphibious assault ships, and this is what they crash the beaches with, are modern, up-armored, bigger versions of these things.
Well, what's amazing to me is this is just a few months after D-Day. This is September, July, August, September of 44. I mean, D-Day was June 6th. And, these tractors were eventually used in the European theater, but more
to cross the Rhone River and all that.
yeah,
Absolutely.
later in the war, however, though. So it's amazing that, I mean, obviously this must have been developed and used by the, like you said, the Navy, to be able to hone this thing, this idea, bring it to fruition, test it out, and be like, oh gosh, yeah, this is a much better way to go, and it helps our guys get inland.
Yeah,
So.
and no other military had anything like this. So, like I said, it's amazing. I know the Marines loved these things.
So here's some specs on the LVT4 coming from Bill himself.
Oh, okay.
I was responsible then for about 12 tractors, the intercom and the radio system. And around saltwater, that's very difficult.
Sure.
with copper
Right.
grass involved.
So did you ride in the Amtrak during the actual invasions or whenever they were doing the assault?
Yeah.
Were you exposed or were you down like in the hold of the Amtrak?
It had the,
Oh, here we go. Here's the
as
picture.
you can see,
Yeah.
a cabin area in the front. And behind it was a wide open compartment.
How tall is that? Is the whole Amtrak?
It varies, but the dimension's 26 feet long, 10 feet wide, which is pretty constant. And then the height of it varies. I would assume up to about 12 feet tall, maybe.
It looks pretty tall.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Wow. We'll
So
post a
that's
picture of that
LVT4
right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they made 800 or so of those. They made more of those
8,000.
than any other. And they had a ramp on them, which was new to Amtrak's. And then you would load up with your troops. Oh, I can tell you about that later, but after you were loaded, when you hit shore, you'd crawl up on the shore and drop the ramps, and the troops, there'd be about 25 or 30 troops in it, and they could peel out the back, hopefully shielded from the enemy. And then after you delivered the troops, then we would haul supplies in later days. I mean.
So once you disgorged your troops, they landed, you would stay on there and you'd turn around and go back to the cargo ship and get either
Yeah.
more soldiers or supplies, and
Yeah.
you keep ferrying them back and forth.
Normally, most of the troops are on the first trip in. There'd be possibly 2 or 3 rows of tractors. And once they had discharged the troops, I don't think anybody ever returned to haul more troops, but they tried to have enough tractors for the initial landing.
So one of the things that I've got a few more specs on the LVT-4 that I found online. Battle ready, it's 13.5 tons is the weight of the actual LVT-4. Like I mentioned that it had a radial engine that was used. Top speed on land it says 14 miles an hour. He thought it was closer to 23. And on sea, it was about 7 miles an hour. Here's what blew me away. It could hold 140 gallons of gas, and it could travel 250 miles on land.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I thought was cool is what he said, which is, no, we didn't go out to ship for more troops, which means you had hundreds of these up armored. Now, these weren't tanks. In fact, what they found is when they tried to use them as like tanks against real tanks, they got blown up. But they were fantastic for hauling wounded away in areas where you were getting shot at under fire. And then later on, both in Okinawa and in Peleliu, these were used for direct support. The tank version of these with the 75 millimeter howitzer, the flamethrowers, all that, they would roll in there and help blast out caves. These were immensely useful vehicles.
Yeah, the armament on these, it says 250 caliber machine guns were on the LVT-4. You mentioned, I think it was the LVT A1 or something like that.
That's it.
That had a turret on it with the 75 millimeter. The secondary armament on it was 3 30 caliber machine guns. The armor was about 2/10 to a half an inch thick, depending on where you were at on the boat and everything. And like he had mentioned before, the numbers I have is for the LVT-4 specifically, about 8,300 were produced during the war.
That's a lot.
But there were a lot more in general of that class of that type of vehicle that were produced.
Totally, like 2,900 of the LVT-2s were produced, and he had all the tanks and everything. At the end of the day, over 10,000 of these suckers were made available. And from what I read, a lot of these survived World War II and were used in the Korean War. They were used by other navies well into the 1980s. So it just goes to show that it was how good of a piece of kit these were.
Absolutely. All right, so moving on, we're about to leave the U.S. Per his own itinerary here, item number 812, he says, embarked aboard the USS Hammondsport with Amtrak at San Diego, sailed at 1600 hours on July the 31st, 1944, a very slow vessel, total of 58 8th Amtrak specialists, and all 104 LVT-2s were aboard the ship when he was
unbelievable. 104 of these freaking monsters, man. That is so badass.
So these were LVT-2s that he was on with. These weren't even the LVT-4 that he would eventually land with. But
yeah, what I read is the LVT-2 was used in more actions across the Pacific than any other series, but the most produced one was the LVT-4.
And one other thing I'll mention to you, he'll talk about this later after the Peleliu battle, and they go back to Pavuvu for their rest and relaxation. He had more training he did. And one of the things that he did there is they were working on improving the LVT-4. There were some design flaws with it. And that was one of the things he had to help do, is help work on some of these and figure out how to fix some of these problems that would always occur with the axles on these things.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah. So, all right, moving on. So now we're going to disembark. End of July 1944, and we're going to start heading out in the Pacific Ocean. After you finished your training with the Amtraks, when did you actually ship out to go out?
It was about July, end of July. It's on my biography there. And,
July of in your biography, gotcha.
43.
Yeah. So let's see. It says that you joined the
44.
Okay. It says you joined the 8th Amphibious Tractor Battalion A Company as a radio repairman July 14th of 44, trained at Oceanside July 14th through the 30th, and then you embarked aboard the USS Hammond Sport with your Amtraks at San Diego, 4 p.m. July 31st of 44, just literally almost 80 years ago to the day, from 2 days ago.
That's true, isn't it?
That's true.
I was trying to figure that out a while
Just
ago.
today's the 2nd, so it's just 2 days ago. It was 80 years ago to the day that you boarded and went out to sea. Very slow vessel, total of 58 Amtrak specialists, and all 104 LVT-2s were aboard that vessel.
Yeah, God's been good to me. Yes.
Wow. Yes, sir.
80 years.
Hmm.
Looks like you then crossed the equator near Baker and Howland Islands on August 11th. It took 11 days, so you did not stop in Hawaii.
Yeah,
You went straight from San Diego past
Yeah.
Hawaii, and my goodness.
I'll tell you about our transport ship. It was a ship they brought over from the Atlantic, and it had always been used to haul railroad cars from the U.S. to Europe. And then they used it, in our case, to load the tractors, and it had three decks, I think. But it was very, very slow. So we loaded the tractors in, and then we slept on the top deck in the open. Well, we strung canvas covers over where our bunks were, or our cots. I think we slept on cots. And then
24/7, so even during rainstorms?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
and it was always comical to me because I being an enlisted man, we had set our cots up out where we could get the sea breeze. So the officers got a choice of theirs were out near the front where they'd get the air, you know. But when we had a big rain or two, they were a little bit unhappy about that. Anyway,
I'll keep moving on here.
I forgot to tell you, our ship was old and very slow. I think 18 knots, I would think, and not being a sailor, but that was our maximum speed. So they wouldn't let us travel in a convoy due to submarine problems. So we traveled alone. We're chugging along here, and the convoy's off miles away there. But every once in a while, there'd be I guess a cruiser or a destroyer or something come along and say, "Are you guys okay?" So when we didn't get to go through the Navy ceremony for the crossing of the equator or whatever is involved there.
Well, I guess that's true. That was more of primarily a Navy.
Yes.
Like a,
No, but they like to, well, Marine Corps is a
yep.
group of branch of the Navy.
So did they do the initiations typically for the Marines aboard the ships too?
Typically they do,
Yeah.
but since we were so slow and had no protection, I guess they didn't want to take a chance on being all buzzed out that way. So,
Did you see any Japanese? Was there ever any concerns of Japanese submarines? You know, being by yourself, away from the.
no, I never did.
Wow.
And I don't know that anyone did on our ship. When we were aboard ship, they would always tell you the smoking lamp was out. You didn't stand along the rail smoking a cigarette. I mean, they were that concerned about being detected. The submarine might be able to see that light.
Sure.
And even if you had a watch, back then watches had, you could see them at night.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted
Iridescent.
if you wore that, to turn it in. So
Oh, really?
they
Even
were
that little bit
they were
of.
that picky about it.
Wow. Yeah, so I had to include that part about subs because you know me, Tony. I'm scared to death of subs. They're just insidious. No, but one of the things that we really explored quite a bit on the Ira Bewley series was the fact that in the first Battle of the Philippine Sea, which was actually happening right around this time period, we took out a lot of the Japanese subs. We actually crippled the Japanese Navy on the subs. There were still some out there, but the threat from subs was not as prevalent as it was earlier in the war, obviously. And you always wonder how in the world, why would the Navy and everybody, why would they let these guys get on these slow boats that were sitting ducks out there and basically be thrown to the wolves, you would think. I still don't understand that. They kept them away from the convoy.
Right.
I mean, it's like, how does that work? What was the calculus in that? Well, I mean, obviously, it worked, at least as far as we know it did. I mean, I'm sure there were some sinkings, but anyway.
I don't
enlighten
know.
me, Tony. I don't know.
I cannot enlighten you on this because I think part of it had to do with the time period, right? It's 1944, mid to late 1944. And we had shellacked a lot of the Japanese subs and Japanese surface vessels. The other thing is just the sheer size of the Pacific Ocean makes it difficult to find ships or convoys. I was looking up the USS Hammondsport while we were going through this clip. Its number is AKV-2. I couldn't find how fast it went. He was saying 18 knots. I'm not saying he's wrong because he said right after that, he goes, "Look, I'm not a sailor. I'm not sure. I just know we went slow." But I'd be willing to bet that it was a lot slower than that.
I bet it was too.
And the other thing I kept thinking about is maybe it was the Ira Bewley series. We started reading and doing the math about how long it took is also during the Harvey Hunt one.
The Harvey Hunt series too.
That's
Yeah.
it. How long it took them to make it to these islands from wherever their rear operating base was, and it would be weeks. So literally what was happening is as these guys were leaving San Diego, not stopping at Pearl Harbor, going out to ultimately you're going to see Pavuvu, which was their rear operating area, or actually their forward operating base at that point. While all of this was taking weeks, you had men, tens of thousands of men and equipment moving towards a battle that would not occur for weeks. And while that was happening, other men were being mustered and brought together to be sent out. You were literally fighting battles while other groups of troops were on their way to fight a battle that would not take place for weeks. It's amazing to me. I always had this idea of, oh, okay, well, we go to Tarawa. We sent troops there and we fought Tarawa. And then we went here and there and the other place. But you had to stage these things. It was a conveyor belt.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable. And these ships were slow. 10, 12 knots was about all you could get out of most of these, to be honest with you.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, the Harvey Hunt series he talked about how painfully slow those transports were. And but then later in the war, they had some faster boats.
Yes.
And
we talked about that as well, that all of a sudden you were getting these fast attack transports that could go 18 knots.
Yeah.
Yeah. So really interesting.
Yeah. So, all right. So now he has made it across the Pacific to his first real port of call, and that is the island of Pavuvu, which, what a strange name, you think, right? Well, Pavuvu was actually the island just north of Guadalcanal. I got on Google Earth, and I'm like, I need to figure out the geography of the Pacific a lot better because there's these islands. I mean, gosh, it's like you said earlier, it's so vast. So there are all these different island chains that were the stepping stones for the battle in the Pacific. And so Guadalcanal was a battle that the 1st Marine Division fought in 1942, September 42, August, and I think it lasted for a good couple of months at least. Mm-hmm. And then we had it secured, and it became a training ground after that, and Pavuvu was an island just north of there, which would be one of the rest and relaxation areas for at least the First Marine Division, but as well as some other units also. So let's go ahead and get into that. Go ahead, Tony.
So are these clips gonna describe Pavuvu in more detail? Because
I've got
I got some, because do you have some things on this? Because I think the audience needs to know what Pavuvu is really like. If he's going to tell us, then I'll just wait.
I've got something I was going to read from Sledge's book.
All right, you got it. Go ahead then. Go ahead.
But if you got more, then you obviously chime in.
I'll wait for that. But when I read what Pavuvu was really like, because you're talking about rest and relaxation, I'm like, oh,
yes.
All right, but at any rate,
okay, here we go.
Yep.
Crossed the international date line on August the 12th of 1944.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
I don't hear anything, Ryan.
Not far. Yeah.
And my screen looks different. I got the Warrior Next Door dog tags on instead of the video.
And then you disembark from the USS Hammond Sport on the Russian... Well, that's weird.
Yeah.
What the heck happened?
I don't know. It's like when that previous clip ended, it snapped to this view.
All right, let me stop share and I'll come back in with it.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, this is the view. Okay, now we're back to it.
All right, let me see if I can start this again. All right, here we go. You crossed the international date line on August the 12th of 1944.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
Not far from the equator.
Not far. Yeah, it was like the day after you crossed the equator. And then you disembarked from the USS Hammond Sport on the Russell Islands, sorry. And then you onto LSTs, and then you disembarked from the LSTs at Pavuvu on August 21st.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Pavuvu was the 1st Marine Division's rest and recuperation camp. And R&R is a great thing. It's an important thing because you're not fighting, you're resting up, hopefully. And I think even the 6th 6th Amphibious Tractor Battalion, or one of the battalions, their R&R was in Hawaii. And here we're in Pavuvu, which is a little coconut island. The British had occupied quite a number of these islands and had coconut groves planted and coconuts on them. And that's where our R&R took place.
It's hardly fair.
No. Between battles, that's where you'd go to rest and recuperate.
Yeah.
It was a boring period of time there.
So I'm going to read now from the With the Old Breed that was written by Eugene Sledge. It's the classic Marine grunt story that I think a lot of Marines are required to read. Talking about Peleliu and Okinawa, the very same path that Bill is on here. But he talks about on page 31, preparation for combat is the chapter, and he's talking about when they come into Pavuvu here. And he says that if Pavuvu seemed something less than a tropical paradise to us, replacements fresh from the States and New Caledonia, it was a bitter shock to the Gloucester veterans. When ships entered Makiti Bay, as the General Howe's had, that was the ship he was on, Pavuvu looked picturesque. But once ashore, one found the extensive coconut groves choked with rotting coconuts. The apparently solid ground was soft and turned quickly to mud when subjected to foot or vehicular traffic. Pavuvu was the classical embodiment of the Marine term boondocks. Yeah. It was impossible to explain after the war what life on Pavuvu was like. Most of the griping about being rock happy and bored in the Pacific came from men stationed at the big rear echelon bases like Hawaii or New Caledonia. Among their main compliments were that the ice cream wasn't good, or the beer was not cold enough, or the USO shows were too infrequent. But on Pavuvu, simply living was difficult. For example, most of the work parties I went on in June and July were pick and shovel details to improve drainage or pave walkways with crushed coral just to get us out of the water. Regulations called for wooden decks in all tents, but I never saw one on Pavuvu. Of all the work parties, the one we hated most was collecting rotten coconuts. We loaded them onto trucks to be dumped into the swamp. If we were lucky, the coconut sprout served as a handle, but more often the thing just fell apart, spilling the stinking coconut milk all over us. So that's just a little bit about it. He goes on for a couple of pages
Oh,
about how
dude.
bad Pavuvu was. And Bill's going to talk about it a bit here too, but what do you have, Tony? Do you have anything you want to add?
The only thing I had, so all that is what I read as well. It's all reinforced. I don't understand why the Marine Corps would do that, but they did. But if there was a silver lining. So in Donald Miller's book, The Story of World War II, some of the men that he interviewed who were in the First Marine Division and were on Pavuvu, they said that because there weren't as many distractions as you would have had in a place like Hawaii, you really got to know your units really well. They trained fairly regularly, and it actually kind of created like an esprit de corps, like a closeness. It reminds me a little bit, Ryan, when you and I were transferred to Borger, Texas, when we were with Phillips Petroleum. And Borger, Texas is a small town, the Texas Panhandle. There ain't much to do if you're young people like we were back then. And some of the friendships that you and I created with each other and with other people there are with us to this day because it's not like we had all these other things that would allow us to go out and do stuff. So, I mean, I'm not trying to say that Borger, Texas was Pavuvu, but what I'm saying is,
Well, in the oil industry, I mean, you could call it that.
You could call the oil industry Pavuvu, yes.
It's that or onshore Nigeria. Which one do you want to go to, right?
Yeah, exactly. But to me, the only silver lining I've been able to read about this terrible place is just that the men it did create a closeness. And the other thing, when you think coconuts, right, you think like coconut oil and almond bars, and I mean, I can't imagine how bad a rotting coconut is. They thought it was terrible, but when I think of coconut, I think happiness, right? I think going to the beach, I think copper tone, but apparently when these things rot, it's not like that.
You think of tan, bronzed bodies,
bikinis,
and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't think rotting coconut detail. So, at any rate, no, I'll let you continue with the clips, but it was just funny that how you set this up with rest and relaxation because apparently that wasn't quite exactly what happened.
So Sledge says, he goes on to say, for the first weeks on Pavuvu, the stench of rotting coconuts permeated the air. Wow. We could even taste it in the drinking water.
Oh my.
He said, I am still repulsed even today by the smell of fresh coconut.
I'll be damned.
So, okay. And then he goes to talk about land crabs. I mean, he said their blue and black bodies were about the size of the palm of your hand.
Lovely.
And they had bristles and spines all over their legs. They hid by day and roamed at night before putting on your boondockers each morning. Every man in the 1st Marine Division shook his shoes to roust the land crabs out. Many mornings I had one in each shoe and sometimes 2 in each shoe. Periodically, we reached a point of rage over these filthy things and chased them out from under boxes, sea bags, and cots. We killed them with sticks, bayonets, and entrenching tools. After the action was over, we had to shovel them up and bury them, or the nauseating stench developed rapidly in the hot, humid air.
What a terrible... Oh my God. Maybe the Marine Corps thought, let's put them to a place worse than the battlefield and they'll be happy to get to the battlefield. What the hell, man?
Absolutely. Yeah, pretty bad stuff. So, all right, so we're going to move on here and he's going to talk a bit more about the downtime that he had and what it was like for him on Pavuvu. What did you do to pass the time on Pavuvu?
They had us train, even me being a radio man, to learn how to drive the tractor and maneuver it, whatever, if I had to. Mm-hmm. And then you just didn't do a whole lot. I remember I had bad teeth, That's one reason Air Force wasn't interested in me. They even did some dental work on me. And I keep telling myself, this guy had a treadle drill system. I don't see how that can be possible.
No, it is.
A drill bit for teeth work has to be really high speed.
Yeah.
But I think that's what he had, because we didn't have, well, the tents had electricity available, but he was just set up out here in the open. And I don't know who, I guess he paddled it, I can't remember.
Wow.
But it was real crude setup for doing dental work.
I don't understand why some branches of the military required, and I always heard it was the Air Force or the Air Corps, required, a lot of dental work to be done. Now, a lot of these guys coming out of the Depression were malnourished, like you said, and therefore they probably did have some dental issues, coming into the military. And, you don't want to develop an abscess or, have some issues when you're out on the front line, where you're.
So
yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if it was I don't know if it was Marilyn Walton or if it was Oscar, but one of those told us, we asked that. I think you asked them that. And their answer was because the bad dental work and all that can affect sinuses, and those things can be affected by changes in air pressure, making sure that your teeth are in good shape was really, really important. And I remember learning that on our podcast and thinking, oh, I did not know that. And so I think that's what it is.
Well, you learned it, but I didn't. I forgot all about that.
And I think you asked the question. Hey, I forgot about starting a fight with a 7-year-old guy. So it's okay if we forget these things once in a while.
That's why we're here. We're here for each other, Tony, right?
That's right.
That's how it works. Okay, so now he's going to talk about some of the rations that they were given to kind of help them out, pass the time. So it looks like you were on Pavuvu and that is about 40 miles northwest of Guadalcanal. Your biography states here.
Yeah, that's 1st Marine Division.
Okay.
Plus, we were permanently attached to the 1st Marine Division, so
Okay.
our R&R camp was set up with them.
Okay.
On Pavuvu, yeah, and that was a miserable place.
So it sounds like, that you said they had you some training there at Pavuvu, but what,
Yeah.
your downtime, would you just swim and relax? What else was there to do?
Well, I remember when we first got there, some of the young officers said, we need a toilet system, so we'll go out over the ocean, have a floating system, and build your platform there with a seat. The Navy's toilets was just a long trough with water running through. Anyway, our young lieutenants said, well, we'll just get coconut trees and build us a floating toilet. Well, they cut 2 or 3 logs and had them all ready and got them over here at the edge of the water and pushed them in. And the logs just slowly sunk.
Oh.
So a coconut tree was so full of moisture that it wouldn't do the job for us. Didn't really want to float. So they backed out on that deal.
And you didn't have any other trees to take the place of the coconut trees for that, did you?
I don't remember. I'm sure there were other trees, but and then as far as swimming, I was enjoying swimming we had a snorkel and a mask and the whole works that you could check out and use. And then my ears got to be a problem. The water evidently wasn't as clean as it was really clear pretty water and a lot of really beautiful coral. It was interesting to be able to go float around out there and check that all out. But the water got stagnant or contaminated from human beings, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And I had to give that up. So every Friday they would have an issue of beer and Coke. And I didn't drink beer. And I liked Coke, and I didn't care for beer anyway.
Yeah.
So I think we would get about 2 6-packs of Coke, and maybe the same beer, same amount. But I would trade 1 beer for two packs of Coke to the beer drinkers. So that's what I did. And that was our entertainment. Plus, the guys would get all soused up and entertain each other quite a bit.
Yeah.
During the weekend. I think that was about every Friday.
Oh, that was really uplifting, Ryan. So let's see here. So he goes on R&R. They give him beer, but he doesn't drink beer. So he has to give it away. They try to go and do some swimming and build a pontoon thing, and the only wood on the island sinks. And then he swims into beautiful coral, and it's polluted by human feces, and it gave him an ear infection. So, wow, this is really wonderful, Ryan. I'm glad he had some good R&R there.
Rest and relaxation. They were just, it was just a paradise for them,
Oh my Lord. Well, hey, the coral was pretty.
Apparently the place was a beautiful place on a boat off the shore. But as you got closer, it got worse and worse.
What's that smell? I don't know.
I can't imagine. And then the other thing that Sledge talked about was the fact that, you're on this coral, so you're getting cut all the time by this sharp rock that makes up the entire island. And then you're in 100-degree heat on top of that. So these wounds that these guys would get would fester.
Yeah.
And they'd have all these issues with healing that, it was just horrible.
They'd get beriberi and malaria and some sort of crotch rot that had a special name. Yeah. Oh my Lord. So the Germans had a special award for their troops who survived the first winter in Russia because of the hardships that they endured. It was called the frozen meat badge. And that's not what the Germans called it, but that's what the soldiers called it, but not the high command. It's almost like the people who fought in the Pacific needed a version of that, not just a combat infantryman badge, which is highly coveted. That shows, hey, I fired my weapon in anger and was in enemy fire myself. That's a very brave thing. But another badge that just says, I endured some crap in the Pacific that the boys in ETO never had to do until maybe Bastogne when they had their own frozen meat badge. But the more I learn about this, you start to realize that a lot of the casualties that they had were because of things like this, not just battlefield at all.
Not to mention, of course, and this is something we'll talk about later with Okinawa, not to mention the mental aspect, the psychological aspect that breaks a lot of these guys down and that went through the battles and then came back for R&R and they couldn't deal with things, and so anyway, all right. So now his time in Pavuvu, they're getting ready to start training more for the eventual invasion of Peleliu. I know you're thinking, my gosh, we're just now getting to Peleliu, right. but there's so much information here that, obviously we're going to have this be a multi-episode series here, but anyway, so at this point, we're on item number B5 on Bill's itinerary. He embarked aboard the USS Crescent City at Pavuvu Island on August the 25th of 1944, sailed August 25th to near Lunga Guadalcanal, which is about 40 miles away, participated in amphibious landing operations from the 28th until September the 7th at Guadalcanal. And then from there, they sailed to Peleliu Island for the invasion on September the 15th. So we're going to hear him talk a little bit about the training right now on Guadalcanal. Looks like you embarked aboard the USS Crescent City at Pavuvu on August the 25th of 44. And then you sailed and arrived near Lunga, Guadalcanal on August the 27th. And you did amphibious landing operations and training August 28th through September 7th at Guadalcanal. And then you sailed from there on September the 8th and arrived and disembarked at Peleliu on September the 15th of 1944. Okay, first of all, what was Guadalcanal like when you were there? I know this was a few years after the initial invasion.
It was soon after. We would practice land. There was a number of rivers, small rivers that flowed into the, I'll say, the east side of Guadalcanal. And that's where Henderson Airfield was, which was a Japanese airfield. And but of course that fighting was already over. But we would maneuver, make practice landings there near Luanga River, I think it was. And that had been a very active area during while they did take care of the Japanese there early on. There were still native children and women there, and they would come down and we could visit a little bit with them while we were maneuvering. If you weren't in your tractor chugging around, you.
Wow. Just can I stop?
September. Yeah, go ahead.
Hold on. So just really quick. So they're in Guadalcanal. The 1st Marine Division is back at the location that made them famous, which is Luangwa Point, or the Battle of the Tenaroo River, or Alligator Creek.
Alligator Creek, that's correct. Yep.
That's where the first time that we had Japanese soldiers coming to attack these Marines who had never engaged the Japanese in battle, and we just decimated them. And that would start the very long struggle for Guadalcanal. How appropriate is it for the 1st Marine Division, the old breed, who made their stand on Guadalcanal, to go back to those sites to practice amphibious landings for the next battle? And what do you think's going through his mind when he's reading about these famous battles from these famous Marines, and now he's walking on the beaches by the river where this battle just took place a year and a half ago?
That's, and you have to wonder if that's not part of it. These guys are all fresh recruits. They've never seen battle before. They have to understand, look at these guys before you've done just 2 years ago.
I think you're probably right, Ryan. There's a psychology to this. There's a real thing called chemistry and esprit de corps. And I can't think of anything better for the replacements to be able to train with the old breed, where they were made famous before they went out to battle. Man, I thought that part was chilling.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry for interrupting. Go ahead and keep going. But I just want. Oh, sorry.
Sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Was that the invasion date?
Yes.
So tell me how that was, riding these Amtraks in with the Marines aboard at the invasion.
They had, I think, 2 full amphibious tractor battalions assigned to that landing. Now, our 8th Amtrak had just arrived overseas, and we had very little training. And they used about half of the 8th Amtrak battalion. Before any invasion, they'd figure out just how many tractors do we need. So then they needed 2, and about a half, I'm not sure, it was a portion of our battalion. So I didn't land in that landing, but I was there as a reserve troop if they needed me. I think that's where my training in the U.S. during my first year in the Marine Corps kind of saved my hind end. because that was a terrible landing. But I went ashore the second day, and there's still a lot of fire going on. You could hear mortars and rifle fire and big guns. I remember my first night there was, of course, they had bombed the island like crazy, so there were big craters. So I was down in a crater there. That was my foxhole.
Yeah.
But with 2 or 3 other guys. And I remember the land crabs were scattered in there, making all kinds of noise.
So
Everything frightened you just like crazy,
yeah.
So one of the things he talked about in the opening clip was those crabs, being in that shell crater and hearing those crabs all around. The reason why everything frightened you, it's his first exposure under fire to combat, but also it's nighttime and you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of these land crabs crawling all through the woods, all through the brush around you, making noise. And the Japanese were quite famous for the banzai charge and for sneaking through the brush and jumping into the hole with you and killing you. So these guys had heard all about it. You're on mute, Tony. These guys had heard all about it and they were frightened to death. I would have been too. So when he talks about being scared to death and he talks about the land crabs, he's making a connection there. Okay, so.
Yeah, totally. And not only that, but Peleliu was the first island where the Japanese rethought their tactics. It may have been the Battle of Biak before that, but right around this time where they didn't put most of the defensive positions on the beach like the Germans did on D-Day. They put them back into a deeper, better defensive position where they could bleed the American military white. So all the Marines had known up until this point was to expect the fighting on the beach. The beach was a dangerous place. Get off the beach. So Bill would have been thinking about this when he was in that foxhole. Every little noise very well could have been a Japanese because in the past they always were. And I want to read something from Sledge's book with the Old Breed about the landing because he talks about coming in on these Amtraks. It's just a quick paragraph. He writes, or Sledge writes, the men had been ordered to keep their heads down, but Sledge peeked over the high gunwale and saw several Amtraks. I'm sorry, this is not from Sledge's book. This is from Donald Miller's book, The Story of World War.
Okay.
Yep, because it's weird that Sledge would call himself that. At any rate, right? But Sledge did. I'm talking myself first person. The men had been ordered to keep their heads down, but Sledge peeked over the high gunwale and saw several Amtraks get head dead on by screaming shells and watched in horror as the bodies of Marines were blown into the air. Those that were still alive began walking on the shore and were slaughtered by machine gun fire. The noise from the battleships and the Corsairs, the Navy fighters, and the dive bombers were so incredible it was indescribable. You couldn't even yell at the man next to you and have him hear you. As we moved into position, we could see and feel the power of the 16-inch salvos fired from the battle wagons right over our heads. Every time they exploded, trees and debris were hurled into the high air. And on that first day, not just the first day, Ryan, the first hour, we lost 60 Amtraks and Ducks in the first hour. 60. You got to remember, a lot of these had 25 men plus their crew on them. And that was the first hour of combat from 8:30 to 9:32 a.m. 60 of these were taken out. So I just wanted to add this because this is something that Bill may have witnessed. He definitely would have witnessed the carnage when he got on the beach. He wouldn't have witnessed what it's like to be on the first wave, but he would have seen it. And he would have had to taken his Amtrak through it. And then when he was on the beach, he would have been surrounded by this cacophony. And something else that Donald Miller writes from the people he interviewed, he said most of the men said that the entire time that the men were on Peleliu, there was always gunfire every second. There was never any quiet. There was so much activity going on. And you would have heard that in that foxhole that night too.
And just think about that. I mean, that was the first night and you don't realize that this is going to continue for the next 6 weeks. however
Yes.
long the battle actually took.
Totally. And that was another faux pas we made. General Rupertus was quoted as saying that this will be a 3 or 4 day operation.
Yeah.
And because of that, it didn't get much press coverage. There weren't a lot of people from from Stars and Stripes and all that there to kind of document this because they thought this was just a little sideshow. No one had an idea that this would last as long as it did.
It's funny. It's almost like Guadalcanal was like that.
Yes.
Guadalcanal started. They had a battle that happened for a few weeks. There's the famous book Guadalcanal Diary by Richard Tregaskis. That he's a war correspondent, and he writes. He's on the island. He's documenting the war, the battle, and everything. Then he gets aboard a ship and leaves because the fighting's over. Well, no, that was just the first battle of Guadalcanal. The second, there was a whole resupply of the Japanese that came after that. So these things happen. They tended to kind of drag on. Part of it was because of poor intelligence. Part of it was just changing tactics, and we had to adjust. So,
Totally.
all right, let's continue with his thoughts on the landing.
I wasn't in the landing bunch. They took, I always thought about half of our battalion, they needed that half to make the invasion.
Mm-hmm.
The other half, I know in my case, I think it was the other half of our battalion, didn't make the initial landing. We were held off, and then we went ashore the second day,
Okay.
and we were there as reserve troops.
Okay.
And since I had quite a bit of training in radio, I thought I got a fair deal there. They not wanting me to get into the battle part of it, so I was held in reserve there.
Okay.
And there was quite a number of people that were in reserve.
So when you were in the crater, the bomb crater, taking cover, that was your first time
Yeah.
really being exposed, so to
Sure.
speak, and out in the thick of it.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind? How did you feel?
You're just totally frightened to death, near death.
Right.
And I did pray some that night, and it's just terrifying because you're exposed to all kinds of fire, mortar shells. If you ever hear a mortar shell coming, you can actually hear it whistling, and hopefully it goes overhead or hit short. But so there was mortar fire and big gun fire from the Japs, and they were on the bluffs above, overlooking the landing area there. So they had quite an advantage during the landing itself.
Yeah.
Tony, do you have anything about the Battle of Peleliu, like an overview of it that you can tell us about?
Yeah, when you told me that you were going to interview, Bill, and that he was a Peleliu survivor, and then we got this set up, it's kind of revisited some of my sources, and he just mentioned that bluff, and that bluff was called the Point. So Peleliu is an island about 800 or 900 miles east of the Philippines, and I think if I look at these clips coming up, he's going to talk about the reasons for invading it. So I'm not going to cover that, but the island is roughly oriented north-south, maybe a little bit northeast-southwest. It's longer than it is wide. And the invasion beaches were in the southwest corner. They're called Orange Beaches. And from north to south, for the first, every infantry division in World War II had 3 regiments in it, and each regiment had 4,000 fighting men. So to the top, to the north, right near the point, not right near this bluff, was the 1st Regiment under Chesty Puller. In the middle was the 5th Regiment, which was under Colonel Harris. That's the one that would take the airfield. That's the one that Sledge was a part of. And then the very south, which is the southernmost tip of the island, was the 7th Infantry Regiment, and they were there to cover that flank. And so what happened on the 15th is they made it on to the beaches. The one in the middle, the 5th Infantry Regiment, Sledges, made it the furthest. They had cover of the coconut groves before they got to the airport. So before they got to the airstrip. So they made it a couple miles in. To the south, there was a number of pillboxes that delayed them, but they were generally making good progress. But it was the area to the north, which was the point, which was Chesty Puller's objective, that would become the biggest problem for the invasion. There were 2 pinch points during Peleliu. One was the point, and the other one we're covering in a minute was called Bloody Nose Ridge. But what happened after days of fighting is it came down to a company of men fighting hand to hand to finally take the point. And in fact, I'm going to read from a common source right here, which talks about the moment that the point was finally taken almost a week after the invasion. It reads, "A rifle platoon then began knocking out the Japanese gun positions one by one. Using smoke grenades for concealment, the platoon swept through each hole, destroying the position via a combination of rifle grenades and close quarters combat. After knocking out 6 machine gun positions, the Marines faced a cave housing a 47 millimeter gun. A lieutenant blinded the gun crew with a smoke grenade, allowing Corporal Henry W. Hahn to launch a grenade through the cave's aperture. The grenade detonated the 47 millimeter shells, forcing the Japanese defenders out with their bodies alight and on fire, and their ammunition belts exploding around their waists. The Marines' fire team was positioned at the flank of the cave, where the emerging occupants were gunned down one by one as they fled on fire, ammunition belts ablaze. But it wasn't over. K Company had captured the point, but Nakagawa, who was the colonel in charge of the defense of Peleliu for the Japanese side, counterattacked several times over the next 30 hours. The Marines had to resort to hand-to-hand combat to fend off the attackers. By the time reinforcements arrived, the company had successfully repulsed all the Japanese attacks. Out of the original 160 plus men in a company, it had been reduced to 18 men.
Oh my gosh.
Fought to 18 men, hand-to-hand combat, going cave to cave to take the point. Once they had the point, then they could move inland. Then they could start to work up the northern portion of the island. And that's where they would run into you try to pronounce it, Umbrugol.
You did a good job earlier before we started recording. It's Umurbrogel, isn't it, or something like that?
I think it's Umurbrogel. I think that makes a lot of sense. But the Marines called it Bloody Nose Ridge, and so the Umurbrogel or Bloody Nose Ridge. I just talked about the point and how long it took them just to take the point. That was just to get off the freaking beach. Okay. Now they're going to spend their time on the main defensive position, which was Bloody Nose Ridge, which was a 2 or 3 mile strip of jagged, ragged coral up the middle of the island. And in fact, Private Russell Davis described Bloody Nose Ridge as, quote, ripped bare of all standing vegetation, peeled down to rotting coral, rolling in smoke, crackling with heat, and stained and black like bad teeth.
Oh my God.
That was the hell that they went through on Bloody Nose Ridge. And the Bloody Nose Ridge not only had an extensive cave network, it was also defended by the 14th Division of the Kuomintang Army, which was a seasoned, battle-hardened elite division that had been fighting in China since 1935.
Wow.
So these were men who saw some stuff, and they were on this island. There were potash mines on this island, with mines and tunnels and caves, and some of the defensive fortifications had these rolling steel doors that would shut after the gun fired. And in some of the fortifications, you can't make this up. This is so Japanese, it's unbelievable. At both the point and at Bloody Nose Ridge, there were some fortifications that had only a firing slit. And what they did is they would put the men in the fortification with the gun and seal them in with their supplies.
What?
There was no.
I had never heard of that.
Yep, it was written about on a common source and is also in Donald Miller's book, where they would certain positions, they would seal the Japanese in, so that way there was no vents or anything. There was no way for them to escape. They would fight out of that firing slit until they were destroyed.
Oh my gosh.
So that is the maniacal sort of enemy that they were facing at the point and at Bloody Nose Ridge. And I just want to read a little bit about Bloody Nose Ridge, about the sort of things that happened there. So they're talking about working their way. So what happened? Bloody Nose Ridge was initially assigned again to Chesty Puller and the 1st Regiment. And over the first 6 days of fighting in Bloody Nose Ridge, the battalion, which was a portion of a regiment, there's 3 battalions to a regiment. The 1st battalion that went in there to fight suffered 71% casualties. As they penetrated deeper into the ridges, this is from Captain Everett Pope, who would have been in charge of a company, leading his remaining 90 men to seize what he thought was Hill 100. This is in Bloody Nose Ridge. It took a day's fighting to reach what he thought was the crest of the hill, which was in fact another ridge occupied by more Japanese defenders. It was a false high. Trapped at the base of the ridge, Pope set up a small defensive perimeter, which was attacked relentlessly by the Japanese throughout the night. The Marines ran out of ammunition and had to fight the attackers with knives, fists, even resorting to throwing coral rock and empty ammunition boxes at the Japanese. Pope and his men managed to hold out until dawn, which brought on more deadly fire. When they evacuated the position, out of the original 90 men, only 9 remained.
Oh my gosh.
That was the kind of fighting that occurred on Bloody Nose Ridge. And here's what happened. It ended up taking a huge toll, not just on the men, but on the leaders who were fighting it. Because of the failed frontal attacks, it was none other than Eugene Sledge's 5th Regimental Commander, Colonel Harris, who had this bright idea. They had this airport, and by the way, the airport was active a day after the following day after the invasion. The airport was taken, and that day Corsairs were landing, and they were flying off that airport the day after the invasion and bombing these various areas. At any rate, he took a Piper Cub up and flew over this position, and what he saw scared the shit out of him. He knew there was no way a frontal attack was going to work. He came back, and he had a chance to meet with the other regimental commanders, mostly Chesty Puller, and then the general of the division at the time was Rupertus. And what he was saying was, we can't do it this way. We can't do a frontal assault. We need to bring up assault guns and flamethrowers and all this other stuff and work our way pocket by pocket. And this is a quote for how this idea was received by the leaders of this attack by the 1st Division. This is from Donald Miller's book. And he writes, when General Rupertus came close to accusing Harris of cowardice for this strategy, saying he was using too much ammunition and not enough men, Harris replied, quote, this is a famous quote now, "General, I'm lavish with my ammunition and stingy with my men's lives." At that moment, the tent flap opened and in came George Geiger, who was in charge of the whole operation, who looked directly at Harris and said, "That's the most sensible thing I've ever heard. You can't take positions with dead Marines."
Well, that's true.
You can't.
Yeah. I mean, look, lavish with your ammunition, you need those Marines to fire the ammo.
And because Rupertus supported Chesty Puller with these stupid World War I style frontal attacks, when the battle was over, they would be sent back to the States. They would never command another invasion or any troops during World War II again. It was a stain on their career, and it was something that is still taught to this day, where you are lavish with ammunition and stingy with your troops. You hear that in every battle or every war that we fought since World War II. It's our mantra. because at the end of the day, when we finally had a chance to overcome the resistance in Bloody Nose Ridge, after these tactics were employed by Harris about going more slowly, being more deliberate with howitzers, they called these tactics that he employed the blowtorch and the corkscrew. And when the Army was finally brought in to help relieve some of these Marine regiments, they would continue to use this. It took another 6 weeks after these tactics were employed to push people out of Bloody Nose Ridge. And to this day, in the U.S., the battle was controversial because the island's negligible strategic value. We're going to hear about that in a minute. And the high casualty rate incurred by American troops during the fighting, which exceeded that of all other amphibious operations during the Pacific War. The National Museum of the Marine Corps called it the bitterest battle of the war for the Marines. And many people in the U.S. military consider it the bitterest battle ever fought by the U.S. military.
Wow, that's quite a line of statements. I mean, in terms of, how it's perceived and everything out there. It's too bad.
It's unbelievable. So what I just took the listeners through is from the landing to the airstrip to being able to take the point on the edge of the landing beaches and what they had to finally overcome, both with poor leadership and with the maniacal resistance to take over Bloody Nose Ridge and to finally liberate this island. And Ryan, you and I were talking about this beforehand. There were Japanese who didn't surrender out of that damn ridge until some cases 1948. I mean, after the war. I mean, talk about maniacal resistance. So, at any rate, that's the kind of stuff that happened on Peleliu. I think will add some color to some of the things that he's talking about coming up.
Yeah, let me move on to the next clip here.
So when you were in the crater, the bomb crater, taking cover, that was your first time really being exposed, so to speak, and out in the thick of it.
Yeah.
I think I already played that clip. Let me go on to the next one. I couldn't remember. We took a digression there, and I couldn't remember which clip I played. Okay, here's the reasons for invading Peleliu.
Okay, the acting president had told MacArthur his group was down on Bataan Peninsula. They were isolated from safety. The Japs were moving in on them. They said he got orders to get himself out of there and save himself because they needed his commanding. So they put him on a PT boat. Have you ever heard of a PT boat? Mm-hmm. Wooden, speedy boat. Mm-hmm. Actually, our President Kennedy was skippered one of them. Mm-hmm. And took him to Australia. And this was quite a long while before our landing on Peleliu. But he planned, after got everything gathered, regrouped, months later he would come back and re-enter the Philippines, MacArthur would. So he was going to enter on the east side, which I'm going to say is Manila, but I'm not sure what's there. But it was near Peleliu. Peleliu was 200 or 300 miles away. So we needed to secure Peleliu because it had an airstrip. And so that when he made his re-entry, we could cover his hind end.
Oh, okay.
And so that was the reason. Actually, you probably know there was some question of whether he even invade Peleliu.
I had heard.
And the big wheels got together.
Yeah.
I think one of the Navy guys, commanders, he said, let's just skip it, but they needed it to protect MacArthur's re-entry.
I understand. Okay.
So that was kind of a stupid mistake, which you never know.
That was Halsey. Halsey was famous for saying we shouldn't be attacking Peleliu. and he was overridden by Nimitz, and they moved forward with it. And I think it's seen widely as a mostly unnecessary battle, where a lot of unnecessary casualties were taken by some pretty poor command decisions early in the battle.
I'm going to read from the book Islands of the Damned by R.V. Bergen. R.V. Bergen fought alongside Eugene Sledge. He's even portrayed in the movie, in the series The Pacific. But he was one of the old breed guys. He had fought on Cape Gloucester before Sledge arrived. So he was actually kind of an old, and a more experienced guy in the unit whenever Sledge came in and stuff. But he says this, this is on page 127 of his book. He said, "You read nowadays that the Battle of Peleliu should never have been fought. We should never have invaded, experts say, and I agree. We took that island to secure the airfield so that the Japs couldn't use it against MacArthur when he was landing on Mindanao to the west. But we had already bombed that airfield 3 months before, and we could have gone on bombing it 24/7. We could have made it absolutely unusable. There was no way the Japs could have rebuilt it in time. They were finished as an air power. Just days before our landing at Peleliu, Admiral Bull Halsey wanted to pull out, but Admiral Nimitz, his superior, refused. General MacArthur wanted to take the island as well, and Roosevelt approved it. We were then committed."
Yeah, that's it.
So there, in a nutshell, from a guy who was there and who's thought about it his whole life, is his perception of it. And, the idea that there's this one lonely airfield there. The thing that's amazing is, the Philippines were not far away. And at this very time, in October of 44, that was when the Battle of Leyte Gulf started. And that gigantic naval battle that really was the coup de grace for the Japanese Navy. So you're right. Was Peleliu really necessary? In hindsight, for us armchair historians,
Not really.
not really. And coming from the guys who fought there, it doesn't sound like it. They kind of question it themselves. There's even some passages in Sledge's book where he talks about it. I won't get into that because it just makes the same points, really. So,
well, and not only that, Ryan, but there was already a precedent for this, and that's Wake Island. When the Japanese took Wake Island from us in 42, we never reconquered it. The Japanese occupied that island till the end of the war. It was stranded. It wasn't a threat to us. We would use it for live fire practice on the way out west to the real battles. We could have done the same thing to Peleliu, and we were already doing that with some of these other islands. Rabaul, this huge fortress Rabaul, we completely bypassed that and never worried about it being, in the flank, even though it was south of the Philippines. So yeah, I could see where these guys would feel a little tender about that.
well, and at that time in the war, and maybe we didn't know, but in hindsight, we knew that we had crippled the Japanese military on a number of levels, mostly their air power and their navy.
Yep.
And after the Marianas Turkey Shoot and the first Battle of the Philippine Sea and the loss of their submarine force, essentially, then after Leyte Gulf, was it really necessary to take some of these islands and everything? But hindsight's 2020. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of new information coming in every day on the line there, and I'm sure that it's just mistakes were made. But in what wars aren't mistakes made?
Yep. And the key is to learn from them. And I also love how you brought the submarine thread in again in this conversation. This is the third time you've done that. I know, dude, you're so neurotic about these freaking submarines.
And would you believe there's an actual, well, it's a U.S. submarine. There's an actual submarine just 30 miles away from me right now. The Batfish. I can't hardly sleep at night.
Oh my God. Threat to our security. Oh my gosh.
All right. So here's, he continued to talk a bit about the reason for Peleliu. Let's hear what Bill had to say.
So it looks like it took about 2 months to get Peleliu secured.
Yeah. We went in the 15th and we left on the 20th of the next following month. It actually wasn't totally secured for quite a long while, but we were able to use the airstrip. But MacArthur's re-entry was the day before
Yeah.
they declared our battle over with. They possibly got to use the airstrip because the Seabees move in immediately after the landing and take care of that. So.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a really worthless battle as far as.
I guess the objective was achieved. Was to prevent the airfield from being used.
No, it's so that we could use it.
Okay.
That was.
I see. It
That was
wasn't.
the way we worked all the way across the whole South Pacific.
Gotcha. So it wasn't a
The Navy would blow up the island. The Seabees, they'd blast it before our landing. The Seabees would move in as soon as they could after the landing and repair the airstrip, so that would give us another strip to operate out of. And my brother, he was in the Seabees. He was on Inuitak and Kwajalein and wound up on Tinian. That's the way it worked. The system they had set up was the Navy bomb everything like crazy. We would land and secure the airstrip. Well, here it is, full of bomb craters, but the Seabees would move in with their equipment and patch it up so that we could use the airstrip again.
And now he's going to talk a little bit about securing the island.
So you spent a few months on Peleliu.
No, I spent a little over a month,
Okay.
but they didn't actually call it secured for maybe another month or two, but the Army, one of the Army divisions moved in and did the final work on it. The Marines were pretty well wiped out or blasted away. It was the highest casualties, I guess, of probably any battle during World War II.
What were some of the more harrowing or frightening moments that you had while you were on Peleliu?
I walked out to, like I say, the first night I was in this crater and actually hear mortar shells firing in our direction. I could actually hear rifle fire, and there was big gunfire. And a day or so later, I walked out toward the airstrip, and there was the airstrip was an X, and we landed at one end of the X. That's where we camped. And I walked out there to see what was going on, and there was a two-man tank. Japanese had two little tiny tanks, and one of them was sitting there right at the end of that strip. Halfway hanging out of it was a Japanese soldier that was just burned to a crisp. I guess the flamethrowers had gotten to him. And later, it's either the next day or maybe 2 days, I walked out there again, and here was a young Marine. No, it would have been the next day. And he was dead. He was the most healthy looking guy you ever saw, except he was in our dungarees, or after you own them for a while, you wash them in salt water, your clothing, or dungarees, then they get bleached out, ragged looking. He was in a brand new pair of dungarees, And he had been dead long enough that his helmet was on his head, but was kind of, his body was swelling up, so his helmet was pushing off of his head. And so we were under all kinds of fire, and we were sleeping in the open. Later, I'll say after maybe a week or so, there must have been a typhoon or something. We were having our meal under we tied a canvas fly up to cover us while we ate. And one of the trees, most of the trees had been blasted pretty hard for the initial landing. This tree had been evidently blown about half in two. And I think it was a typhoon. It was a really severe storm. The tree blew over, and we're underneath it eating. And the branches, what was left on it, wiped out 4 or 5 guys. And I was right here, and the trunk of it hit me in the head, and they carted me into the tent, and they said I was knocked out for 30 minutes.
Wow.
Which is quite a long period of time. And for a week or two after that, I got conscious, and they visited and talked to me to make sure I was sane. And then I made the mistake, I think, really, when you think back on it, saying, no, I didn't need to go to the hospital ship to be checked out. I suffered with it for, and my life later seemed okay, but there for a week or two I was in really bad pain.
Wow.
In my shoulder and my neck.
Were the other Marines killed, or were they?
No, none of them knocked out that I know of.
Really? You were the only one?
Yeah, that was what was strange. So I think the branches part of the tree hit them, and somehow the trunk just got me and wiped me out for sure.
So going back to the Marine that had the fresh dungarees on, that was dead, did you ever find out what that guy's story was, or
No.
why was he a brand new
Yeah,
replacement?
yeah, that was what. That's the reason it struck me so. You could tell if he had on brand new dungarees that weren't faded, you felt like he was a rookie. You know, hadn't been around there long, or hadn't been maybe even in the Marine Corps very long. And but it was just startling, because otherwise he just looked like a strong young man laying there, but he's dead.
Some of the, it's a story about something that he's never going to know the answer to. I mean, all around that island, all around all these islands, there are, unresolved questions, and, he's always going to wonder, he has his whole life, what that guy's story was. Obviously, he was a new guy that probably just arrived, was a replacement. Sounds like he found the guy at the same location where the Japanese tank was, with the dead Japanese soldier hanging out of it. So I don't know. Who knows what happened there? Whether the guy saw it was his first dead body that he saw, and maybe that was just too much for him, or who knows what. But well, I guess, yeah.
I mean, a couple of things that came to mind, or from that series of clips is there were 17 tanks on that island, Japanese tanks on that island. They were light-skinned, light tanks. They came out, I think, on the second day, and they were all wiped out on the second day. The second day is when the airport was taken, and I think I see a clip coming up where he's going to talk about that. So I won't say much more about that. But there were 17 tanks. There was a small tank battle or anti-tank battle that occurred on that island at that airstrip. The other thing is the tree, right? I mean, you got all the they're I mean, we run into this a lot when we cover these guys about all the near misses they had with things that just had to do with being there. Men getting killed from coconuts landed on their head. And that happened, right?
Yeah.
And now here's this guy trying to eat. They have a storm. And by the way, we haven't mentioned this yet to our audience. The temperature on this island was horrible. You're at 7 degrees north latitude. The heat index was often 115 degrees, sometimes higher. Many men died and perished from heat exhaustion. And the initial slug of water that they brought on this island came from, look, you tell a bunch of Marines, hey, clean out these diesel barrels. They were full of diesel fuel. Well, they're going to do a half-assed job. They don't know. If you told the Marines, clean out these barrels of diesel because we're going to put fresh water in it for our next invasion, they probably scrub them a lot more closely. But someone in charge never told them that. So when they filled these things full of water and brought it to Peleliu, the water was almost not drinkable for the first week or so. And so you have all these things going on, and then you almost have a tree that could have landed on him and killed him. So at any rate, it was a really interesting series of clips that you cut out there, Rhino.
Well, he actually will talk here in a little bit later about just how many ways there are to die.
Yes.
And he goes through a litany of things that can get you, and not all of them are a bullet.
Absolutely. Right. So at any rate, really, really interesting there. And in terms of the soldier with the clean uniform and all that, there could be shock trauma from an explosion that could destroy your, the innards of you. We had men that died in the Gulf War from IEDs that didn't have a mark on them. So
that's
again,
a great point.
It just adds to the whole litany of ways to die when you decide to go to war with someone.
Yeah.
Did you participate? Obviously, you have the book here, With the Old Breed by Eugene Sledge. Did you participate in any of the same battles that he describes on Peleliu, as far as like taking of the airfield that they talk about, and how crazy that was? Were you?
No, I was nearby the airfield, but I was held in reserve. Mm-hmm. If they had reached a situation where they needed replacement troops, I was subject to being called, but they never did.
Thank goodness, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I say, my training in the U.S., I think, they felt like if you spend a year training a guy, you kind of want to keep him around to help out. And that's always been my thought.
Sure.
Yeah, so thank goodness for the radio repair training that he got. There's one guy I wanted to read about that was a Medal of Honor recipient, actually. Let me see if I can find where. So Richard Krause, Private First Class Richard Krause, was in the U.S. Marine Corps, and he was part of Bill's unit. He was part of the 8th Amphibious Tractor Battalion, and he got the Medal of Honor on Peleliu. It says here, I'm just going to read his citation: for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while serving with the 8th Amphibious Tractor Battalion, 3rd Amphibious Corps Fleet Marine Force in action against the Japanese forces on Peleliu on October the 3rd, 1944. Unhesitatingly volunteering for the extremely hazardous mission evacuating a wounded comrade from the front lines, Private First Class Kraus and 3 companions courageously made their way forward and successfully penetrated the lines for some distance before the enemy opened with an intense, devastating barrage of hand grenades, which forced the stretcher party to take cover and subsequently abandon the mission. While returning to the rear, they observed 2 men approaching who appeared to be Marines and immediately demanded the password. When instead of answering, one of the 2 Japanese threw a hand grenade into the midst of the group, Private First Class Kraus heroically flung himself upon the grenade and, covering it with his body, absorbed the full impact of the explosion and was instantly killed. By his prompt action and great personal valor in the face of almost certain death, he saved the lives of his 3 companions, and his loyal spirit of self-sacrifice reflects the highest credit upon himself and the United States Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life for his comrades. Harry S. Truman, President of the United States.
Yeah.
So, these guys in his unit, in Bill's unit, were in the thick of it. They were out there. I have a feeling there's a lot more that happened to Bill than what he's letting on. There's a lot of gaps here in his milestones that he's talked about in his itinerary. And you know what? That's okay. He doesn't need to go back there for us. We don't need these guys to have to relive this for us. What we're trying to do here is just make everyone aware of the history and, the sacrifices that he and others made, not only with their lives, but with what they've had to live with their whole lives. So they've actually named a U.S. destroyer, the USS Richard E. Krause. It's DD 849.
Yeah, and what we try to do, Ryan, isn't, and with reading from these books and trying to amplify and add context to these veteran stories, we're not trying to heroify them. We're trying to make it more clear to our audience and to ourselves and for posterity, what these men faced. It's as simple as that. Eugene Sledge, one of the books that we refer to a lot, it's in this photo, or the previous photo of him. It's something that he had read and coveted. He benefited from taking notes during the war and putting them in his Bible, in his Gideon Bible. Not everyone was able to do that. Not everyone can recall because they didn't have these aids to help them with it. So to me, these additional citations that we research to add to these is to let the audience know more about what these men had endured. And in fact, you just talked about that Medal of Honor winner. Basically, the stretcher bearers came under attack by the Japanese, and then they came through with their amphib to try to extricate them. That happens so much. I said this earlier in the interview. The Japanese love shooting medics. They love shooting stretcher bearers. And there's a quote from Eugene Sledge's book about that, about the hatred they had for the Japanese and how it was not racism. It was based on something else. And he writes, "You cannot imagine the cold hatred we had of the people who shot at us as we were taking out our wounded and were unable to fire back. Historians say we hated the Japs because we were racist. Racism had nothing to do with it. It was the way they fought." So now here's an example of someone who won the Medal of Honor doing that very thing. And it's interesting because this is one of the quotes I pulled from Sledge's book.
So I was reading, I don't know if I can find it now. I was doing research on the Okinawa part of the battle. And there was a part where they talk about, how bad the fighting got. And part of the reason why, some of the real horrible stuff that happened was based upon the U.S. Marines seeing what the Japanese did to desecrate the bodies of the American GIs, the Marine Corps guys. And then, therefore, this no quarter thing started to become the mantra where not only did we not hold back on wiping out the Japanese soldier, but we did some of the same things to their bodies that they were doing to ours. And that's in the Eugene Sledge book also.
Oh, we turned into savages. That's another quote I pulled from Eugene Sledge book, where he writes that it was one of the most murderously fought battles in all of history, and it is a frightening reminder of the debasing consequences of unrestrained warfare. war fought without let up or conscience. It's exactly what you just said. It's that when you get to the point where you see the other side do things and you start playing tit for tat, it devolves into a savage style of fighting where both sides just hate each other. And that's exactly, it happened before Peleliu, but for these replacements where this was their first battle, and Sledge writes about it, and I have a feeling Bill felt the same way, you start that becomes learned behavior.
So, on that subject, I'm reading from, the Battle of Okinawa Wikipedia page, but there's a lot of great information. It's a very, very detailed Wikipedia page here, but they talk about, the desecration of Japanese remains. It says the ruthless atrocities by the Japanese throughout the war had already brought on an altered behavior deemed so by traditional standards by many Americans, resulting in the desecration of Japanese remains. But the Japanese tactic of using the Okinawan people as human shields brought about a new aspect of terror and torment to the psychological capacity of the Americans. And they talk about the desecration of remains. I mean, it's so grotesque, a lot of the stuff that they talk about, and I'm not even going to go through a lot of it here because it's nightmarish stuff. Yeah. And, if you want to hear just a sampling of it, you need to read Eugene's book, With the Old Breed. It has some of the most shocking stuff that you didn't realize Americans were capable of. But the really horrible morale, the atrocious conditions that the soldier was put in these conditions where they were seeing what the Japanese soldiers were doing to our bodies, it bred this atmosphere of just animalistic behavior.
Well, can I just read one more thing that kind of emphasizes this before we move on? So you can talk about the battles and the firefights. This paragraph is just about day-to-day living, and it has to do with some eating a K ration, which is exactly what Bill was doing when that tree fell down on him. He wrote, this is from the Story of World War II, Donald Miller. We would cover our head with ponchos from head to toe and put them on stretchers. They talk about the dead Americans, put them on stretchers behind the company area. It's all they could do with the Americans. But the dead Japs were lying all over the place in the ridges. There was no place to bury them in that coral, so they just bloated and rotted. Maggots tumbled out of their mouths and eyes, and big blowflies swarmed around the bodies. The flies would also get after our food, and nothing scared them away. You had to pick them off your K rations. Often we had to eat within 2 or 3 feet of a dead Jap, and he'd been pretty rotten. And the flies that were on the dead Jap would land in our canteen cups and sometimes fall in the coffee. We didn't have a lot of coffee, so we just pulled the flies out and drank it. Yeah, that sounds debasing to me.
Oh my gosh. To further that, I'm reading from the page on Wikipedia called American Mutilation of Japanese War Dead. And I know that this is a horrible topic, but this really conveys, a lot of this came out of the Peleliu battle, a lot of this stuff here. One example it says here was related by a man named Orr Marion, a U.S. Marine, who suggested that soldiers became like animals under harsh conditions. He said, "We learned about savagery from the Japanese, but those 16 to 19-year-old kids we had on Guadalcanal, were fast learners. At daybreak, a couple of our kids, bearded, dirty, skinny from hunger, slightly wounded by bayonets, clothes worn and torn, whack off 3 Japanese heads and jam them on poles facing the Japanese side of the river.
Yeah.
The colonel sees the Japanese heads on the poles and says, 'Jesus, men, what are you doing? You're acting like animals.' And a dirty, stinking young kid says, 'That's right, Colonel. We are animals. We live like animals. We eat and are treated like animals. What the F do you expect?'"
Amen. Amen.
So imagine that kid. I mean, he's actually given the colonel a dose of reality. Like, well, what do you expect?
Yep. And that's exactly what you end up becoming in those conditions, because that's what we are at the base of us. That's why they call it base instincts, right?
And debased.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Totally.
So in the end, okay, so this is the end of the Peleliu portion. Tony, do you have at your fingertips what were the total casualties at Peleliu?
Yeah, they're quite startling. So, by the end of the battle, uh, there were on the American side 1,573 battle deaths, 6,531 wounded and injured. Right,
Gosh.
so that's almost 8,000 wounded or dead. On the Japanese side, 10,694 dead, 301 prisoners. That's it. No dead, wounded prisoners. Just they all died, and there's 300 of them that ended up surrendering out of the entire 14th Division of the elite Kuomintang Army.
So you're saying, okay, so you said there were 10,000 initially? Is that what you said?
Yeah, when they started off, the Kuomintang Army had 10,900 men. 10,695 were killed. They were dead. And the remaining 301 were the prisoners. And that's it.
So is that basically what, a little less than 3%? Is
Yeah.
that right?
No, it's 0.3%, Ryan.
My gosh.
Yeah. No, hold on. Look at that right. 3
No, that
times
is
10 times 10. Yeah,
30%
that's right,
would be 3,000.
Yep,
So
you're right.
So wow.
3%.
And those statistics, I mean, that they held up, they were that way across all the islands. I mean, it was just, they were there to fight to the death. That was just plain it,
Yep. And this one, because of the Bloody Nose Ridge, and he mentioned it, I mentioned it, I read it several times in terms of the rate, not total number of dead. The rate, the percentage of men who started off fighting who died on Peleliu was higher than any other fight. More people died taking the island of Peleliu than the entire Normandy beach complex.
Oh my gosh. That's when that puts things in perspective for you.
Sure does.
Okay, how you doing on time? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Well, now Peleliu is behind Bill at this point. And so guess what? They get R&R again. And where are they heading back to?
Hawaii.
No, not to Hawaii. That's not for these guys. They're going back to the beautiful, wondrous paradise of Pavuvu.
They were probably all sad.
So the island was declared secured on October 19th of 1944,
Yeah.
the day before the landings at the Philippines, the Battle of Leyte Gulf and everything.
Yeah, we left the next day.
And yes, you left the next day and arrived back at Pavuvu on October the 30th of 44. And it looks like that you guys did more training there.
Yeah.
And then in March of 45, gosh, so you were there for several months
Yeah.
on the island of
We were
Pavuvu.
supposed to rest up. Well, 3 or 4 months. Wasn't very long, was it? Let's see.
Well, it's like it says that you arrived October 30th and you were there till March 10th.
Okay.
So that'd be
Yeah.
4 months, 4+ months.
Yeah, that's where we trained. And
Okay.
like I say, our battalion was new when we shipped over. So we did have quite a bit of training, and they were teaching me to operate the tractor.
Okay.
The tractors had a problem with the transmission, and it was a cross. It had a radial aircraft engine, I think you mentioned it. And I think it was 7 cylinders.
Wow.
Our radial engines always an odd number of cylinders.
I don't think I know for sure.
Okay. Anyway, like you mentioned, it was as noisy as it could be. Well, it just drove out of it had to be the center of that engine. So the engine was set down real low. And to get from my location radio to the driver's side, I had to crawl over a tunnel, an area that was raised. Anyway, the transmissions were forever given up in those tractors. It was a really bad system, but you're stuck with it. So every time the mechanic had to get in to get to the drive shaft and transmission. I had to remove my big radio, and it was a big thing. It was that square and about that long. And to get, you actually took the armor plate off the top of the cab, get the radio out, and then pull some more sheet iron out and get his transmission out. So that was, we stayed really busy.
Oh my gosh.
Doing that constantly.
Well, I was wondering what the reliability was of those tractors and everything.
It was really bad.
Oh, really? Did they improve upon them and bring out better ones?
I think later on they come out with a inline engine. I have no idea how it worked. And they had a lot of the Amtraks weren't cargo. They weren't for cargo. They were armored real heavy. So maybe that's where they had the room to put an inline engine in, but ours had to have this compartment. It was big enough to haul 25 or 30 troops in, and you could actually haul a Jeep in it. And we frequently hauled ammunition in it. So it was, maybe the others didn't have near the problems we had.
Well, it turns out that a radial engine always does have an odd number of cylinders.
Ah, does it?
I read that it allows for a smoother running engine by enabling a consistent firing order where every other cylinder fires, minimizing vibration and ensuring balanced power delivery throughout the engine cycle. I did not know that.
I didn't know that either. Yeah.
So
I think I'd heard that somewhere a long time ago, but when he asked me, I was like, I don't know, actually, you know.
I would have did the same thing. Dude, I just looked it up. I didn't know any of that shit. So
all right, so now he's getting ready to they're getting ready to do the exercises in preparation for the landing in Okinawa.
So when you landed at Okinawa on April the 1st of 45, were you still in a LBT4 type Amtrak at that time? So you were still using the same style of Amtrak tractor? Okay.
Excuse me.
Sure. Can you tell me about was it a similar sort of thing as Peleliu where you held in reserve, or did you land? How did the landings go for you with your job?
No, I was very active then. Peleliu was, they only needed half of our battalion, and we were new overseas. We had Okinawa. You've heard of LSTs, which hauled, they were giant cargo ships. You'd run your tractors in on the lower deck, and the tractor crew, the battalion, we slept in our tractors below deck, rig up some way to sleep. We usually had a cot. The troops were actually on the very top deck, and a few hundred of them up there, I guess. And then the process was they'd come down and load on, and you'd crawl off and go to war.
Sorry, we'll keep going here.
I was in A Company, and the A Company captain, or A Company commander, rode it. He's the third man on our intercom system. We were in the first wave of troops to land at Okinawa. Okinawa, the resistance near our landing, the Japs had kind of revised their Banzai system of fighting. And they actually moved in and fortified the middle of Okinawa a ways from where we landed. We landed at underneath Yontan airstrip. They had Yontan, they had another one nearby. But we were right below, this beach was below this Yontan airstrip. And it was their bigger airstrip. And the resistance there wasn't heavy at all. So the troops moved in right quick across the island and started moving north through the Yontan airstrip.
So I'm going to take a few minutes here and kind of talk about a bit of the background on the Okinawa invasion. I know we've covered some of this previously in the Ralph Heddick series, which was series number 30. We aired that in September of 2023. But this is a little bit more concise, and let me just kind of get into some of the beginnings of, you know, what the philosophy was behind why we needed to invade Okinawa. And then as he goes through more of the battle, we'll talk at the end of it about some of the, you know, the takeaways and the stats and the sheer size of this battle. So, you know, the strategy that the U.S. employed in the Pacific was the Pacific Island Hopping Campaign. Everyone's heard about that. Basically, we had to start on the eastern side of the Pacific with, you know, Midway and, you know, different. Well, Midway was a defense, but we had to go and dislodge the Japanese from all these islands that they held and make our way across the Pacific. And a lot of it was based upon the ability to eventually get to Japan and have our B-29 bombers be within range of attacking the Japanese mainland. So Okinawa was the final island to be invaded by the U.S. during World War II, and therefore it's known as the last battle, the final real battle of World War II. It's the southernmost island of the Japanese home island archipelago, lying just 950 miles from Tokyo, from the capital of Japan, which was well within the 3,250 mile range of the B-29 Superfortress. It is not one of the main islands of Japan. Instead, you know, taking Okinawa was kind of akin to someone taking one of the Florida Keys from us, okay? But by taking Okinawa, it would allow for a staging area for the eventual invasion of the Japanese main islands, which was scheduled to occur in November of 1945. So that is the main reason why Okinawa was important. To that point, we had marched across the Pacific. We had invaded Tarawa. We had invaded, you know, the Marianas with Saipan and Tinian and Guadalcanal and the Solomons, and we'd marched across the Pacific, taking away one by one these island strongholds that the Japanese held. And so now this was the home stretch, so to speak. However, the Japanese, or the invasion of the Japanese homeland, which would occur in November, would have been the, you know, the granddaddy of them all. No one wanted to endure that. So taking Okinawa is next, though. So now we'll get into the start of the invasion here with him, and we'll talk about how that all went. The invasion started on Easter Sunday, April Fool's Day, 1945.
I think it's the first
So
night
we fell out of
had
the
a
display again.
giant fire.
Sorry, go ahead, Tony.
No, we fell out of the display again. I don't have the display up. I can't hear his footage.
All right, we'll stop. And we'll share again.
Mm-hmm.
All right, got it?
I got it. Let's roll.
All right.
I think it's the first night had a giant fire at Yontan. Burned a big fuel fire. They called it a fuel dump, but I think it's where they stored aircraft fuel.
This was the Japanese aircraft fuel
Yeah.
that was burning.
Yeah. And I had a picture somewhere of the Jap aircrafts that were stacked up there. So
So when you landed in the tractor, did you typically drive inland a ways before the soldiers jumped out, or was it right at the beach?
Either way, in our case, we had room to go far enough ashore. You could drop your ramp on the back and still be on land when you came out.
Oh, here we go.
We made the landing there, and after about, that was the 1st of April, and about the 6th of April was the world's largest ever kamikaze attack. It wasn't all, primarily, major part of it was where we are in that area, but the Navy had ships set up across the island and other places.
Mm-hmm.
But I did experience it. I'm sure it's the biggest kamikaze attack ever. And that's terrible. The Navy lost a lot of people, lost a lot of ships. Oh, Kadena airstrip was right near Yantan, not too far away. We were up there on a mission doing something around Kadena when the kamikaze attack occurred. So we sat there and watched it. We didn't involve ourselves in it because we weren't we weren't capable of shooting down the aircraft. But
With the kamikazes,
that's
did you witness them from the island hitting the ships?
yes. I was amazed at how much ammo the Navy can put up. It's amazing, and they don't hold back. When you tell those Navy guys to shoot, a Marine has to worry about his fuel, his ammunition supply, and not waste too much of it. And the Navy hauls everything. They haul the food, they haul the ammo, they haul everything. So they don't worry about it, man. You'd see they were shooting down some of the aircraft, and some of the ships were getting hit. And we did witness a lot of that. I've read about kamikazes. I think that's probably the largest contingent of kamikaze aircraft they ever sent down.
Did any of the kamikazes ever try to attack land targets?
I'm sure they did. I don't really know. I don't think that was their primary target. It
Sure,
was
but
mostly
ships.
Mostly ships. And the Navy really suffered in all of the kamikaze attacks.
So as we mentioned, the invasion started on April 1st. It took 82 days to secure the island, and that battle, the battle would occur all the way until June the 22nd of 1945. At the start of the invasion, the Japanese troop strength was 100,000 strong on the island. The U.S. would invade with the 1st, 2nd, and 6th Marine Divisions, as well as the 7th, 27th, and 77th, and 96th Infantry Divisions of the U.S. Army. Remember, the 96th Infantry Division was discussed and featured in the Ralph Heddick series, as we talked about earlier. In the naval battle, it was the single largest carrier-supported campaign in World War II. There were 1,850 Japanese aircraft involved, and of those, 1,050 were kamikaze planes.
Unbelievable. When you think about that many men strapping themselves in for a one-way trip. But anyway, yeah, please keep going, Rhino.
It was the widespread and most intense kamikaze attacks of the war. The kamikazes were initially used in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. That's when the tactic was first really deployed. Over 160 U.S. ships were hit, damaged, or sunk by the kamikaze attacks. At sea, there were 368 Allied ships, including 120 amphibious craft that were damaged in the battle, not just the kamikaze attacks, but were damaged overall. While another 36, including the 15 amphibious ships and just 12 destroyers, were sunk during the Okinawa campaign. So we lost a lot of ships during this battle. The U.S. Navy's dead exceeded its wounded, with 4,907 killed, 4,874 wounded, primarily from the kamikaze attacks.
And Okinawa was the only battle, the only amphibious landing. The only thing that came close to it was Guadalcanal. The battles off Guadalcanal and Okinawa was the only place where the U.S. Navy's casualties were close to or rivaled those of the assault units, the infantry that actually landed on the islands.
Man, that's just amazing. These battles are becoming more and more pitched per island as you get closer and closer to Japan. I mean, is it any wonder that the public was growing weary of all this death by this point? I mean, not that they were never not weary of it, but I mean, if you've ever seen Flags of Our Fathers, they talked about the weariness of the public to support the war, to buy the war bonds and to do the war drives. And at this point in the war, Iwo Jima had occurred. The famous photo by Rosenthal was taken of the Marines raising the flag on Suribachi, really gave a second wind to the war effort and the donations from the American people stateside. But these battles were just getting worse and worse, more and more deadly, more and more costly. And you looked at what the inevitable outcome would be. You go from Iwo Jima in February to Okinawa in April, and you have the horrible casualties and the cost of that battle, and all of the ships that were sunk, and all the kamikazes hurled. And then we still have the Japanese mainland to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And you still have over 1 million Japanese soldiers on Chinese soil.
That's true. You've got that too. That's
right?
a very good point.
I mean, it would have felt overwhelming. And it's no wonder, I hate to say it, there's probably some of our listeners are going to vehemently disagree with this. It's not a surprise to me at all that we would use nuclear weapons with an enemy like this.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And he does talk about the atomic bomb later. And surprise, surprise, he was for it because he knew where he was headed next. They were already told they were going to be participating in the invasion of the mainland.
So the trend continues. We told our audience when we started this podcast that every veteran we interviewed supported the atomic bombs. So now here's someone that we just interviewed 4 or 5 months ago. The trend continues. We have yet to find a veteran who said, no, we should not have done that.
Oh, of course. So a bit more. So, the Japanese Navy was really just a shell of itself by this point. They couldn't muster much of any of a defense of the island of Okinawa. And actually, the Japanese launched what was called Operation Tengo. And it was basically a futile naval plan where they sent a strike force of only 10 ships from the Japanese mainland, led by the battleship Yamato, to fight through the several hundred ship strong U.S. naval forces around Okinawa to beach itself at Okinawa and use this ship as basically a beached gun platform to use against the American ships. Now, Tony, I'm sorry, but that is just a Hail Mary. I mean, you're throwing, this is ridiculous. But it's all they've got.
It is. And I've read about this quite a bit. And so the Yamato was a super battleship, had 18.1 inch guns, which were the largest guns ever fit to a battleship. It had a sister ship named the Musashi, who was sank earlier in the war by torpedoes. These ships were amazing. And the genesis for this ridiculous operation occurred in a meeting with the emperor when he was getting told about how bad the war was going. And he just uttered these really words quietly in his high-pitched voice. Where is our glorious Navy? Ooh. And the admirals took that as, well, if the Army is getting bled white and our air forces are getting wiped out, then it's our turn to die as well, even though that they were dying. So this was literally set up as kind of a naval version of a kamikaze mission. It was their way of saying, well, if we have kamikaze pilots and we have our men fighting to the last man in the islands, then we're going to fight to the last ship. And what they did is they took men who were younger and inexperienced, and they wouldn't let them go on the Yamato. They put a skeleton crew on it because they knew that they weren't coming back, and they were barely out of sight of the home islands, and the United States submarine force was so effective, so infested around Japanese waters that the submarines immediately saw this invasion force, casually radioed it in to the task force. I don't know if it's 58 or which one it was at this point. And there was this debate amongst the battleship squadron led by Ching Lee and the aircraft carriers that were led by, I think it was Mitcher or Turner, I can't remember who. And the radio message was, shall you take them or shall we? Because it was so obvious that we were going to destroy them. And Ching Lee of the battleship battalion, he goes, you take them. And so we sent hundreds of ships over there and just blasted the holy hell out of them.
Yeah.
And
So
down.
yeah. So it's like you said, it was sighted at the Yamato task force was sighted as it left the home waters of Japan, and it was attacked on April 7th by 300 U.S. aircraft.
Yep.
The Yamato was.
Yes.
300. 300.
ship.
Sinking it well before it got anywhere near Okinawa.
Yeah.
The Japanese lost all of their ships in the task force, including the Yamato and its admiral, totaling over 3,700 men lost at a cost to the U.S. of just 10 airplanes and 12 airmen.
Unbelievable.
This is where we're at in the war at this point, everyone. I mean, the Japanese Navy that was it. That was the end of the Japanese Navy right there.
That was it. Yes, they had one battleship left and it was broken down in Tokyo Harbor.
And
I'm not kidding. That was it.
Was that the Nagumo or what was
I think it was the Nagamo or something like that.
Nagato or something like that. Yes.
The Nagano. That's it.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, so this is why we could see that this was the battle was becoming more and more pitched. If it was going to be, if they were going to do this when we're taking Okinawa, what would it be like taking the main islands? So let's keep listening to what Bill had to say about being in Okinawa.
And you may have to reset your screen again, Rhino.
All right.
The battle for Iwo Jima started April 1st of 45.
Okinawa.
And looks like the island was declared secure June 21st of 1945.
That's Okinawa, yeah.
I'm sorry, Okinawa, yes. Were you on the island the entire time for that battle, for most of that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I said, they changed their tactics as far as defending and opposing us. Usually they would set up along the shore and have big defense there. Okinawa allowed us more or less to come ashore, but their heavy attacks was down near Naha, the capital of the island, and that was the system they planned to use. Well, that's what they had used also at Peleliu. The primary defense was set up in the caves on Peleliu, not really at the beach. The beach was bad enough, but primarily method of defense was a way to wait on them to come on in and suck them in, wipe them out. But Okinawa, the landing itself was, the opposition from the Japs wasn't really that strong. I know after we'd been there 2 or 3 days, probably a couple of days. We got directed to pick up a load in our tractor. It was 2 or 3 miles down the shore, and it turned out to be 7, I think it was 7 Marines in body bags.
Oh,
So, and I think one of the first things they do when you land is establish where the burial spot's going to be, where the cemetery is. So we loaded those in our tractor and hauled them to wherever been assigned.
That's sobering to hear that. I mean, you think he just said one of the first things they determine is where the cemetery is going to be.
Yes. I was thinking on that too. I wasn't sure if you were going to keep playing clips or not. I was going to stop you. I'm glad you stopped it here because I think that point needs to be emphasized. You know, I mean, all this is part of the standard operating procedure for an amphibious assault. It's unbelievable. And I would imagine that, you know, how we have these big national cemeteries around the world. We've been to a couple of them in Europe. There's probably one in Okinawa, and it's probably about where that one was originally or in that area. I don't know, but it was sobering to hear that was one of the first things that you consider. Where do you bring the dead bodies?
I mean, Tony and I have spent a lot of time documenting, the firsthand accounts of these guys. And, this is times like this, when you start hearing stuff like this and you realize, it was bad everywhere. It was bad in the European theater and it was bad in the Pacific theater. But my goodness, the horror of war and the fact that you're just throwing a human soul after a human soul, pitting them against each other at the behest of their governments.
Yeah.
And it's for, their imperialism is for their growth, their economic growth for their country. And it's for men's desires, for power and everything. And it's such, I don't know how to describe it. I'm not even sure I know what I'm trying to say other than it's sobering to hear, to really look at all this and realize all these hundreds of thousands of men that have died just in this war.
Yeah, millions. Tens of millions of people died in this war. I was watching a show on Nat Geo or BBC where they had these 2 baboon troops that they got to the edge of their territory, and these baboon troops had like 50 members in it, and there was like this head honcho baboon on each side. And they strutted around each other, they postured, and one took a swipe at the other, and then it was on. And then by the time it was over, there was a bunch of dead baboons. And sometimes when I think about these stories and these wars, I feel like, you know what? That's about all we've evolved to. We just got cars and houses and shit. But
we just got really awesome technical ways to kill each other now.
We can talk, we can do
science.
this. But whatever was in that baboon brain that caused them to do that to each other and leave a bunch of dead people for no real reason. There was no territorial gains or losses. One troop didn't take over the other. They just went and fought and died. I always think back to that image when I hear about all the stuff that we're doing. So for our audience, we do venerate our veterans and the men who were caught in this. We do think that there are lessons to be learned from these individuals that are applied to this day, but we sure as hell do not glorify the act of warfare.
Next is the clip that I was talking about earlier where, can you see it, Tony? Okay, where Bill's talking about all the ways there are to die.
I remember on that island, we were constantly under threat for your lives, actually. You have rifle fire, you have mortars, you have big guns. And there we had bombers every night along about midnight. Kyushu is the southernmost Japanese island. And they would fly about 300 miles down and bomb us every night. So right soon after we kind of got settled in, they told us you got to have a bomb shelter for. We finally got some tents set up. You have about 5 guys in a tent, so you got the biggest shelter. It was sandy, which wasn't any big problem, but you had to find some kind of lumber to put sandbags over top of it. And you would lay there, you'd hear the anti-aircraft start at the north end of the island and just come gradually moving down. The bomber he was staying up above anti-aircraft range. And I was thinking, you got all kinds of ways you can get killed there. You've got rifles, you got mortars, you've got a bomb actually. You have anti-aircraft shells that burst and chunks of them fall, and even if you're in your tent, you can get wiped out that way. And you can get strafed. I was strafed on Okinawa. Well, they strafed the mess hall, and it was Jap Zero or one of their aircraft. You have the Navy out here shooting at him. Our mess tent was set up kind of on a little ledge. And the whole shore was that way. It was sandy beach and then a rock, kind of a rock ledge and then the upper area. The mess hall was up there, and so I had just left the mess hall and was out washing my canteen or my gear. And I saw him strafing and heard him shooting, so he was shooting at the tent, but I grabbed, there was an empty water can there. I don't think I had my helmet on. I might have, because we were eating. I'd just left in the mess tent. So I held it over my head, and he strafed the tent, and he actually killed one of the Marines in the tent. The Navy's out there shooting at him with 20 millimeter stuff. And some of the guys in the tent had run over here and dropped down the bluff. And the Navy shell got one of them. Didn't kill him, but it injured him. So you got this guy firing this way and this way, and you're
You're in the middle of it. Yeah.
You know, so there's just all kinds of ways you can get killed.
You know, I mean, that's, you know, and not, you know, he talked about all of the lead that the Navy would put up when a kamikaze was coming in. Where do those shells land?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he's talking about how they were just shooting 20 millimeters at that zero. Well, gosh, I mean, no wonder. I'm surprised more guys didn't get, maybe they did, a lot of guys did get killed that way, but by friendly fire, you know. But think about that. And then there's just the conditions that they're living in, you know. And then there's the, like I said earlier, the psychological casualties that happened from all this. And yeah, so
it's not good for anyone. I mean, like in Pearl Harbor, when it got attacked, the vast, you know, there was a bunch of civilian casualties that were blamed on, you know, sinister Japanese, you know, strafing civilians. After the battle, it was from our anti-aircraft fire from the ships that was landing, you know, on these populated areas of Oahu. It was our own friendly fire. And that's another thing. Not only are there ways to die from the enemy with the bombs, but you got friendly, you got disease, you got malnutrition, you got friendly fire, whether it's bombers shooting bombers, fighters shooting bombers, bombers killing infantrymen, infantrymen shooting at everything that you can imagine, and things that you can't even imagine are happening when you're in a war zone.
Well, I
And
mean, think about it when we go to a gun range. Any gun range, the safety that you learn is you don't ever step foot in front of the firing line. Where your line is that you're shooting from.
Yep.
And if you do, you say, "Hey guys, can we time out? Can I go out there and reset my target?" Now, in this situation, you're all downrange from each other.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that would be. I just can't imagine it. I just can't imagine. It's crazy.
Yeah.
All right. So this next part here, he talks about going into. I asked him if he ever went into any of the caves there. So,
Did you ever go into any of the caves?
Yeah. Well, these were actually burial vaults on Okinawa in the area we were in. And they would find a hillside and dig into it and somehow make it where it doesn't cave in on them. But they'd pour a concrete facing on it with a little entrance in it. And somehow they used it for burial. They would have a big giant vault, a ceramic vault in there. And I remember some of them had, it looked like women's heads. You could see as you looked in, they had long hair. And I think, I don't know whether they mummified them or what they did with them.
Did he just say that like women's had like the dried bodies that he would see in the burial vault?
apparently,
Or
you could
carving?
look into the coffin in the vault and see the face of the deceased.
That's another thing that we've heard a lot of when we interview these guys is how many battles take place in a cemetery.
Right.
Where I mean, because you're going to get cover with the tombstones, and here, that's exactly it. And I seem to recall reading something about the Battle of Okinawa where that was a big deal, how they buried their people and how these vaults became battlegrounds because people had concealment cover behind them. Just another element of war. We were just in Luxembourg over Christmas time for the American St. Nick Festival, and we did a hike on the Call Trail for the Hurtgen Forest. And remember, there was that World War I monument
Yeah.
that was set there. It was for World War I, and there were pockmarks in it from World War II.
Yeah.
Where we surmise someone was probably taking cover in this area, and as the Germans advanced into the Hurtgen, or the Americans did initially, someone took cover behind it, and probably when they were shooting at it, they were shooting this monument from World War I. It's weird how that stuff happens. I don't know. I digress, but that would be pretty macabre.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Okay, so next we move on to some of his closest calls here, and then we'll be wrapping up the Okinawa portion here.
Would you say that the strafing of the mess hall was probably your closest call?
Either that or when I was in the bomb crater in Peleliu.
Yeah.
I did actually hear the president the other day said, I heard this buzz coming by his ear.
Really?
There's some mortars and rifle fire and smaller 20 millimeter stuff. And I did hear some of that passing over me there on Peleliu.
So with the end of the Battle of Okinawa, as you recall that I said that there were 100,000 Japanese troops aboard the island of Okinawa. At the end of the battle, there were 100,000 Japanese casualties.
Holy
And there were 50,000 U.S. casualties and 150,000 Okinawan civilian casualties. So look at that right there. 100,000 Japanese, 50,000 US added together equals the total number of Okinawan civilian casualties. You know, the battle caused more than twice the number of American casualties than both the Guadalcanal campaign and the Battle of Iwo Jima combined, with the Japanese kamikaze effort causing the American Navy to suffer more casualties than any previous engagement in the Atlantic or the Pacific. After this battle, as we talked about earlier, the Japanese Air Force and Navy was non-existent. Japan was defenseless, and the U.S. Navy, the largest, most formidable and powerful navy the world had yet seen, could sail right up to the Japanese homeland and shell the cities with impunity from just offshore. There was no danger of subs, ships, or planes from the Japanese to attack the Americans. The battle for Okinawa, as you kind of can surmise here, was the horrible, titanic final battle of World War II that dwarfed all the other battles in terms of the total invasion cost, casualties, men and material expended. It was crazy. And, you know, and like I said, given the scale of the battle and the losses, it's easy to understand the desire to use the atomic bombs to bring the war to an end before the invasion of the mainland of Japan. So we'll move on now to his discussion on the atomic bombs and the use of the atomic bombs.
VJ Day comes along. So you guys secured the island June 21st. You went on the LST 588 and sailed from there to Saipan. And while that was happening, you had VJ Day, and then you went to Guam, and then Marianas.
Well, VJ Day, they actually signed into the war later on.
It's like September 2nd, wasn't it?
3rd or something.
Yeah. And it looks like you finally got back home to Seattle February 5th of 1946.
Yeah.
So you didn't set
I
foot
lost
back
the audio,
on
Holmes.
the continent until February of 1946.
What is going on here? We'll have to start that over here.
Yeah.
VJ Day comes along. So you guys secured the island June 21st. You went on the LST 588 and sailed from there to Saipan. And while that was happening, you had VJ Day, and then you went to Guam, and then Marianas.
Well, VJ Day, they actually signed into the war later on.
It's like September 2nd, wasn't it?
3rd or something.
Yeah. And it looks like you finally got back home to Seattle February 5th of 1946.
Yeah.
So you didn't set foot back on the continent until February of 1946.
That's true.
Wow.
Yeah, I was aboard the LST at Okinawa, waiting to go to Guam when they dropped the 2 atomic bombs.
What was the reaction like among your compatriots?
I know mine, but the majority of them, I believe, you're thankful, very thankful. That's your thought all the time you're over there. You're 18 years old and they send you over there and they say, you're going to fight these crazy people. Mm-hmm. And your thought is, okay, I'm young and I do what they tell me. So we've got to get the Japs to surrender before I go home. That's, and your major objective.
Sure.
if you can call it that, is to go home and not be permanently crippled. So we favored it. I know your generation and others have heard stories to where they say we were cruel to the Japs, but we lost 23 or 400 people at Pearl Harbor in a very nasty attack. And so it's kind of a trade-off, but if you're the one that's, your life's liable to go any minute, any second, you kind of favor,
Were you concerned about having to be part of the invasion of the mainland of Japan?
That was our primary concern. Yeah. They had told us we were going to Guam. We wouldn't be in Amtrak's, we'd been in pontoon boats. What do they call those things? Ducks. The duck vehicle. So we were going to go to Guam and train. The invasion of Japan mainland, which is 5 major islands, was be in 2 phases. It would be about 3 or 4 months after Okinawa was secured. They would invade the lower part. Kyushu was the very southernmost island, and it seemed to have what we needed to secure. So first half of the invasion of the mainland would be to secure it in the southern part of Japan. I would go to Guam and train for the ducks and be in the second part, which would be another month or 2 later, possibly 2 months. And that would be more near Tokyo. So if you're faced with that and you got a choice of dropping bombs and getting it over with, and it was inevitable, they were going to lose. They were training women, teenage people, in all kinds of kamikaze boats. And of course, both sides are making estimates of, if we do this, how many dead people will there be? And it wasn't going to be very hopeful for either one. But the Jap military didn't want to give up. They were that, to me, stupid. Of course, the emperor, they were dealing with him. The first bomb they dropped, they said, we'll give up if we can keep our emperor. That system of government. Truman and his people said, well, we just didn't tell them, but they said, we just dropped the other bomb. I guess 2 might be all we had, I don't know. And that persuaded them.
Oh, yeah.
But they estimated, there'd be another million Japanese women and children involved along with the military.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the word he said out of all of that was most poignant was inevitable.
Right.
Japanese defeat was inevitable. And in fact, this book I'm finishing up right now that is written from the Japanese perspective about being occupied after losing the war and then having democracy brought in through the occupiers. That made the Japanese populace more angry than anything else, is once they started to understand what was really going on with the military, the inevitability of defeat angered them. Like, what we should have ended this war a year ago. They should have ended this war when they took Tinian and Saipan. It was over then because they could bomb us with alacrity. So I thought that was really interesting how the militarists continue to have their way and then create the conditions where we almost had to invade them.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, I've got to stop right here. I've got to go meet a guy to sell him some stuff on Marketplace, and he's only available right now.
Okay.
So can we pick back up either tonight or tomorrow?
Yeah,
Let's-
we could do that. We've only got 5 or 6 of these left.
Yeah, there's not much left. We've got maybe 15 minutes left of stuff here. So
Yeah.
you want me to just get back a hold of you when I get back, and then
Yeah,
we'll
just text me when you're ready.